Good morning, and can I welcome members to the 5th meeting of the Education and Culture Committee in 2013. Can I remind members and those in the public gallery to ensure that all electronic devices are switched off at all times, because they do interfere with the sound system. Can I take members to the first item on this morning's agenda as consideration of a negative statutory instrument. No motion to annul has been lodged in respect of the instrument, and the Subordinate Legislation Committee determined that it did not need to draw the attention of Parliament to it. Can I ask members if they have any comments on this piece of subordinate legislation? No? Okay, I'll just go straight to the question. Does the committee agree to make no recommendation to the Parliament on SSI 2013-14? Agreed. Okay, thank you. Moving on to our next item on the agenda this morning is to take further oral evidence on the Post-16 Education Bill. We've got quite a busy agenda this morning, so if we can just move straight ahead. We will first of all hear evidence from David Belsey, National Officer Further and Higher Education, EIS, John Henderson, Chief Executive Colleges Scotland, Robin Parker, President of NUS Scotland, Mary Senior, Scottish Official University and College Union Scotland, and Alistair Sim, Director of Universities Scotland. Good morning to you all. There are 5 of you on the panel this morning, so if I can ask you, this applies to the committee members as well as the panel, be brief with questions and answers, and if you feel your area has been covered, somebody else has already covered the points you wanted to raise, then you don't have to repeat them, if you don't mind. Can I then just get started straight away, and we're going to begin with Neil Bibby.
Thanks, Convener. In Colleges Scotland's submission, it talks about concerns relating to a two-tier nature of proposed regional strategic bodies and their constituent colleges. Can I ask the panel, do they believe that regional strategic bodies are subsuming the role of controlling employees and finance? And what does this mean for the legal position of boards of assigned colleges?
John, do you want to start us off?
Well, a new body on the landscape is clearly going to be the regional strategic boards. My understanding is the assigned colleges will certainly still be the employers of staff. Funding, however, for the assigned colleges will largely come through the regional strategic boards. So in the sense of an element of control at the funding level, certainly we're having almost a mini funding council from the regional strategic boards.
In terms of the legal position, I understand that the appointment of principals would be they would be employed by individual colleges, but terms and conditions would be set by the regional strategic boards and bodies. Would that be legal?
It would be legal if the Parliament passed the legislation. Whether it's desirable is for the committee and the Parliament to consider. We think there are problems with it because you have both in terms of lines of accountability and I think the psychology. If you're the principal of an assigned college appointed with your paying conditions determined by a body which is not your employer, I think there's a risk of divided loyalties. Are you loyal to your employer, and how do you account to your employer for your actions? Or are you loyal to the person that determines your paying conditions each year? So I think there are potential difficulties in that. And I think actually they can be surmounted. I think I can understand the thinking behind the legislation. But if you look at the position, for example, with non-departmental public boards, it is the boards that appoint the chief executives of these bodies, but often it's the permanent secretary who will actually come in and actually approve as well them being appointed as the accounting or accountable officer. So I think you can have a measure of oversight either at government level or regional strategic level without actually getting into the territory of employer, and that's where I think the risks in the legislation is framed.
In terms of you questioning whether it's desirable or not, do you believe that a move to regional strategic bodies with control over funding and direction could lead to individual colleges being something akin to university departments or faculties? And you know, is there a danger of high-performing colleges seeing their assets being moved to less well-performing colleges by a regional strategic body? Is
Well,
that one of the dangers?
Well, I think there are clearly risks in that. A lot will depend on how the Regional Strategic Board, and we're really talking not 4 parts of the country now, we're talking about Glasgow, and we're talking about Lanarkshire, and we're talking about the University of the Highlands and Islands area. So how at the strategic level, these bodies form a relationship with the assigned colleges within these areas is going to be very important. I'm more optimistic, actually, than they will not be heavy-handed in the reports to the assigned colleges, but where you have a 2-tier system, there are clearly going to be tensions between the relationships, and it would be important to get the relationships right. I think the relationships should actually be built not so much on a control power basis, but more on an enabling basis. And the contract, if you like, between the 2 bodies, I would like to see the outcome agreement. So at the strategic level, you set high-level outcomes, but you leave local delivery to the assigned colleges. In the same way, nationally, I think the best approach for the sector is to have a strategic funding council setting high-level outcomes, but leaving the regional colleges to deliver, because further education needs, it seems to me, to be delivered locally, because what happens in Stornoway is very different to what happens in the centre of Glasgow or Edinburgh.
Thanks for that. Can I ask you a specific point? You've asked in your submission for the Education and Culture Committee to seek information and clarification from the Office of the Scottish Charity Regulator regarding whether the provisions in the bill will affect charitable status. Could you maybe tell us a bit more about your concerns about that?
Well, whenever you change the oversight between a funding body and a charity, be it government or be it the funding council, there is a risk that the independence of charitable trustees might be affected, and Oscar might take the view that that would move them out of the charitable status camp. I have written to the Chief Executive of Oscar asking him for his view on that. He said the legislation is complex, he needs time to look at that, so I don't have a definitive view on that.
Thank you. Yes, Neil.
In the evidence submitted by the EIS, it says if it's the government's wish to create a nationally incoherent FE structure with a myriad of different types of colleges, governing bodies and funding mechanisms with separate regulations for each, then this bill is the way to go about it. I wonder if the panel would wish to comment on that.
Perhaps Mr Bells should start us off on that one.
Yes, I think what the EIS is getting to is that the bill is not creating a single coherent FE governance model for the Scottish FE sector. What it is in fact doing is codifying two main systems, one of the single college regions with the regional college, and one of the multi-college regions with its regional strategic body. And even within the multi-college regions, you've got 2 types. The one that will probably be formed in Glasgow and Lanarkshire, and the one that will be formed in UHI. And then you've got a 4th type of governance model for the other 2 colleges, Newbattle and SMO. And what the bill does is to create a system that allows these different forms of governance to exist at the same time. And it gives different powers to a regional college board of management as it gives to a regional board which is for a multiple college region. So therefore it's not creating a single coherent system, and if you don't want to create a single coherent system and you want to create this multi-layered system, then the bill effectively does that, which is the point that we're making.
Just coming back to what I said earlier, I think it's inevitable where you have, unlike the Griggs review, which recommended actually simply having 1 college per region, where you accept, and I do accept, that in some parts of the country that isn't the right approach, then how do you, at the regional level, bring coherence? Now, the government, through the legislation, has decided to do that through strategic bodies. What I was saying earlier, I think, with the strategic bodies, if they can be more seen as enabling bodies rather than controlling bodies, I think the risks that the EIS and others have seen are less likely to happen.
From my point of view, I think the case for the governance of colleges to improve is there is a strong case. In particular, I think we need to make sure that college governance becomes much more about the needs of the students involved, in terms of making sure they're delivering courses that put students into successful next stages of their life, whether that's in terms of employment, whether that's in terms of moving on to university, or moving on to further study of some other form. I think there's positives and negatives in terms of the current format of regionalisation that's being put forward. I'd highlight two particular things that we wanted to highlight that we think could be good in terms of being a responsibility of the regional level, which currently aren't. The first one is around student support, and currently each different college can set its own rules in terms of FE student support, and that can create a postcode lottery in which students attending different colleges get a different form of rules that govern the discretionary FE support they receive. That's something we think you could have a much fairer system if it was, well, ultimately a national system of FE financial support would be ideal, but as a step along that path, moving student support to a regional level would be positive. And likewise, in terms of student associations, taking a more, having some sort of regional responsibility for strong student associations, as recommended in the Griggs review, we think that would be a positive direction.
McAlpine.
I could take Mr Belsey back to the EIS evidence. You say that the EIS has long believed that FE governance was poor and had little democratic accountability and insufficient transparency, all being propped up by the 1992 Further and Higher Education Scotland Act. And you say the EIS supports the aims of the Post-16 Bill to increase accountability and transparency. Could you perhaps elaborate on that in terms of you know, the way that this lack of accountability affected industrial relations in the FE sector in the past?
The EIS does share the aims of the bill, which is to improve the accountability and transparency of governance within the FE sector, and we believe that the bill and its suggestions in the way in which the governing bodies of colleges and regions will be changed is a good thing. The problem I think that we see is that the government is not suggesting a well, first of all, it's not suggesting what Griggs suggested. It's suggesting two main different ways of doing that. In terms of past problems, there was a perception that the boards were self-appointing and susceptible, and structurally susceptible because of the way in which the 92 Act was framed, to perceptions of cronyism by which the board members were self-perpetuating and had very close relationships with principals, and that the way in which colleges were run was not open, was not transparent, and because they were not accountable to any other body directly, or certainly very difficult to be held account, then you had a range of governance standards being delivered, effectiveness effectively being delivered across Scottish colleges, which meant that you had the ability for problems such as that which happened at Adam Smith to develop. And we hope that the new governance will make such difficulties less likely.
Would Ms Senior like to comment on the effect of governance and industrial relations in the past?
I guess I'd prefer to confine my comments to governance in higher education, so whether you want to take... Okay.
Okay.
So I think we'll come... I was going to ask you a similar question, actually, but we'll come on to that in a moment. But can I start some questioning on the governance issue, which has obviously come up in, I think, every week that we've oral evidence. So can I begin with Liz Smith?
Thank you, Convener. Just before we do, Mr Henderson, could you tell us what the Colleges Scotland estimate is of the value of charitable status to the college sector?
Oh, I haven't looked at that personally in the last couple of years, but I think the last time it was looked at a couple of years ago, it was somewhere in the region of 50 million, but that was very much an estimate. Whether that is the current figure, I have no way of telling.
So you will be hoping that the answer to your letter that you have sent is that charitable status is assured for the future?
I think it is important because whatever the figure is at the moment, it's likely to be a significant figure.
Thank you. Just on the question of some aspects of governance which I think transcend both sectors, it's been put to us by very much the majority of the people who have made submissions, either in written evidence or in oral evidence, that there is an issue about the autonomy of both sectors. Mr Henderson, you've referred to that in the concept of local delivery, where, as you rightly pointed out, in different parts of the country, there are very different things that you might want to do within a college. And in the university sector, the University Scotland submission has been very careful about the term responsible autonomy. I wonder if I could just ask Mr Henderson and Mr Sim first if they could just comment on whether you feel that the bill as it stands just now is threatening to undermine that responsible autonomy.
Well, I think I would draw attention just to one risk in the legislation, where I don't have any difficulty with the public appointments process for the appointment of chairs of regional colleges or regional boards. I think that's very transparent, that's open, and if there have been difficulties in the past, then that will be an improvement. Where I think, though, there is a risk, if you look at the appointment process for the members of regional boards of the colleges, it becomes less transparent. It's a process which is not defined very sharply, which suggests that the chair will submit a list of names to the minister, and then the minister will approve. Now, as I said earlier, I have no difficulty with ministerial involvement, but it seems to me in that area we run the risk of turning the clock back to a time when ministers actually approved behind closed doors lists of people going to public bodies. I think we've moved on and having a public appointments process. So it seems to me you either have a public appointments process where it's open and transparent for all members of boards, or you have a system perhaps which the universities will be developing, which is a self-regulating system through a code of practice. And you make it a condition of grant that the boards of these bodies actually comply with that code. That enabling model seems to me would lead to better governance in the sector rather than a system which I think risks some lack of transparency. But that's just one example, it seems to me, where the balance is tilted too much away from that self-regulation and control through funding.
Convener, just before Mr Sim comes in on that, Mr Henderson, could I just ask, what would you see as the detrimental effect to the college sector if we did take, as you made the point, put the clock back a bit?
Well, I think there's a fundamental question, it seems to me, about is the further education sector a national service at all? And I used the example of, in Scotland, it seemed to me, there were a number of micro-economies and micro parts of the country where you have to have a local delivery. I think there are a few things that you can determine nationally, but it seems to be a risk in the philosophy underlying this legislation that you pull too much into the centre and away from what is important, I think, in local accountability too. So it's the balance. And where I think there is a need for central control and oversight, you do need a light touch. And the outcome agreements, actually, that the government and the Funding Council are developing with the sector seem to me a good place, almost a contract, if you like, between the funders and the person delivering it, at a very high level, that you want a certain level of quality. Of course you do. You want a certain level of outcomes, but you don't then get into the detail of the curriculum planning and saying to a particular college, you have a certain number of engineers or a certain number of plumbers in a particular area. I think that would be a mistake.
Thank you. In responding to that, I think I would like to sort of frame that response by welcoming the fact that when Scottish Government officials were here on the 15th of January, they did affirm responsible autonomy as one of the principles that should lie behind this legislation, and I think the Cabinet Secretary said words to that effect again when he was giving a speech at Evan Smith Business School last week at the University of Glasgow. So I think what we see is that the policy intentions that have been expressed about this bill, about good governance, efficiency, wide access, are all right. But our perception is that the drafting of the bill has, to some extent, come adrift from the policy intentions, and that particular ways in which the bill is currently drafted do raise issues in relation to autonomy. Now, we think autonomy is important because we think autonomy, the flexibility to respond, the flexibility to innovate, is central to universities' ability to actually deliver benefits for Scotland, socially, economically and culturally, and to deliver benefits aligned with Parliament and the Government's aspirations. Now, in our evidence, I think we've pointed out areas where the drafting of the bill needs to be improved at stage 2 if it's not going to open up those future risks to our responsible autonomy. And I think we have set out in some detail, particularly in relation to sections 2 and 14, ways in which we think the drafting of the bill can be improved. Now, looking through the papers you've got today, I don't think actually our specific amendments were attached to the papers that were circulated. But we have suggested very detailed amendments that we've been over with our solicitors, which we think would get the drafting of the bill back into a shape that would deliver the policy intentions and that would close down those risks that we are perceiving to universities' responsible autonomy and capacity to deliver.
Mr Sim, when we had the 4 principals of universities in front of committee a few weeks ago, all representing very different higher education institutions, they were very clear indeed about the dangers of over-government involvement in the sector, not least because international trends are suggesting that those nations that are doing the best at the moment in terms of HE are those where government is a diminished part of that process. By no means taking government out. Government has that responsibility, of course it must. But nonetheless, they were making the point that, as you rightly said in your own comments there, that to enhance their knowledge exchange, to enhance their research and development, they need that responsible autonomy. Do you agree fundamentally with that point that they have all made?
I think it's absolutely clear in our evidence that responsible autonomy is really crucial to universities' ability to deliver for Scotland. I don't think there is a disagreement over that policy, but I think there is a necessity for the drafting of the bill to be got into a shape that's closer to that policy. And I think we are certainly looking for a specific change at stage 2 that would get the bill into a condition which we thought both delivered over policy intentions and protected universities' responsible autonomy.
My final question, Convener, if I could address this to Mr Parker and Ms Senior. When you're talking about governance in both sectors, I wonder if you could give us some examples, some detail about the areas where you feel that the governance system that we have just now, obviously in colleges and in universities, that you feel it's not working sufficiently well and therefore it has a detrimental effect on the student or the educational experience. Where is the evidence that the governing sector, the governing code that we have just now, is not succeeding in delivering the best possible education?
Okay, thank you. In terms of, I think, responsible autonomy, UCU certainly does support responsible autonomy, but we think that there's key principles that underpin that, which are about academic freedom, collegiality, and recognising that this is a public education system that we're working within. So I think from our perspective, we think it's really important that there's scrutiny of the governance framework which is going to come in for universities. UCU is very supportive of the von Prądzyński recommendations, and I think we've got a concern that the code of governance that is being developed, there's no parliamentary scrutiny of that at the moment, and for us it's really important that that code of governance is reflective of the von Prądzyński recommendations. Now, I think to answer your question that you asked about examples, particularly in the higher education sector, I think we've had a real concern that governing bodies, that's university courts, were really rubber stamping bodies. They weren't effectively scrutinising decisions decisions that were taking place in universities. And I know, I mean, that there was one example, it was Glasgow University, where our union presented a paper on a big change that was happening at the university, and the paper that was presented by the trade union was far more detailed than that actually the management of Glasgow University presented for that specific incident. And you know, that's a concern to us, and I guess it was fortunate that the staff member on court was a trade union official, so who could you know, present those points. And I think that's, you know, there's been, you know, other incidents in other universities that have been reflective of that, where there's not scrutiny of decisions such as closures of courses or closures of departments, which is detrimental to, obviously, to the student experience and has a profound impact upon those staff that are affected.
Just starting off with the university sector, and I think responsible autonomy is a concept we also support. I think the problem is that far too often that autonomy that has been exercised has been not as responsible as it should have been. Starting by looking at university principals' salaries, and across the sector, there's more than £4 million that's spent every year on principal salary, and that's something that has gotten out of control in comparison to the rest of the public sector. So that's one example. I think Mary's already talked about course changes which have been carried out with very little consultation and very little account for the local needs and indeed national needs in terms of course provision. I think when you look at the lack of transparency in a lot of what's being exercised, that's a huge problem. And I suppose another crucial one is in terms of the current diversity of the people who are on governing bodies of universities and indeed colleges. There is a series of things in which, actually, and the other one is in terms of widening access. Whilst I don't doubt the commitment that exists from the university sector to make progress on widening access, the track record as it stands is not what it should be. I think we can all agree. And there again is another example in which the autonomy that's been exercised is not being sufficiently responsible. So I think if the Code of Governance, as produced by the chairs, is something that sticks to the recommendations of the von Brzezinski report, and we see that through, then it is something that will both preserve the autonomy of universities, but inject the necessary greater responsibility that needs to take place. And I think that's my key point with universities in particular, is that there does need to be progress made on governance, and therefore it's right that there is a democratic intervention that increases the responsibility whilst maintaining the autonomy. Speaking over on the college side as well, I think Mr Belsey made some very strong points about previous track record of college governance. In particular, again, I'd emphasise in the past the role of student associations in colleges they've not had the involvement in decision making that they should have done, and this is a real opportunity with this bill to increase the oversight, the accountability that student associations and student representatives can make in terms of overseeing the decisions that are being made by college boards. Again, I think one of the really crucial things is that more needs to be done to protect local access to college courses. Often having that course on the doorstep is fundamentally important in terms of giving people access to education, whether it's the first time or whether it's a second opportunity at it. Now, doing that against the backdrop of cuts is very difficult, and I think the views of NUS in terms of the financial situation is well known, but crucial to this will be making sure that there is sufficient oversight of decision making that's taking place, and that can only be achieved with greater transparency and greater accountability of decision making.
Thank you. Well, if you just told him, Mr Belsey, you come in a moment, but I want to bring Neil Findlay in because we have to make some progress, and I'm sure you can pick up any remarks you want to make in relation to that question.
Can I ask, in relation to the Code of Governance that's being developed, what role your organisation has played in developing it?
And pick up on the points, the previous question. The EIS shares the aspiration and the belief that higher education institutions should be autonomous, and shares the aspiration that they should exercise reasonable autonomy. I think, and the same true for FE colleges. I think autonomy must be defined. It's simply not that the ability to be flexible. Autonomy is the ability to make its own decisions. And I guess the FE sector's autonomy is not as great as the HE sector, and I think the fact that the regionalisation programme is going through Parliament now shows that point. In terms of how poor governance, in effect, can adversely affect the student learning experience, I think there are a large number of concerns, both of our members in FE and in HE, that some governing bodies do not hold their management to account for the policies of the governing body. And a large amount of the casework that I see and sometimes carry out revolves around the almost unfettered use or power of the either university or college management. And I think that is an issue that does need to be addressed. And I think that Pronsniski's report started to address those issues. And really, we don't see that the management and the governors are two separate entities, because some of the university senior managers are also governors, such as principals. Whereas if you look at the bill, the FE sector separates the principal from the governors. The principal is no longer a governor, a member of the board of management in the proposed structures within the bill, although they do have the right to attend and speak at board meetings according to the bill. In terms of the question, Neil Finley's question, could you phrase it again?
Yeah, I was beginning to think, it's like the two Ronnie's mastermind there. It was like, I asked the question, you answered the one previously, but anyway, there you go. I'm asking about the code of governance and what role your organisation has had in developing it.
Okay. The two consultants have met with a group of STUC representatives, including the IS, and we had a discussion around the code. And subsequently, one of the, I think it was Mr. West or Dr. West, then met with EIS representatives in a separate and later meeting about 2 months later. So we've met the representatives twice, and we've given our evidence at those meetings, and we've also followed up by giving submitting written evidence to their website.
Run along, Robin.
Yeah, so every institution, the consultants carrying out the review have met with student representatives in different formats. We've met the ZenUS Scotland, we've met the consultants, and we've submitted evidence to it. I think the question is, well, I should say as well, we're disappointed that there weren't staff and student representatives actually on the steering group of the review. I think that's a major oversight. But I think the most important thing is the pudding that comes out at the end of it, and whether it puts into practice from Pronsniski, and whether the chairs stick to the tasks that they've been set. And there, as I've outlined, there are many issues which really need to be tackled, and they need to tackle in a stretching way on both university and college boards. There is, despite the fact that the majority of students are female, in fact, more or less very close to 50% of staff are female. The overwhelming majority of people on the governing bodies of university colleges are male, and that's something that clearly needs to be tackled.
Yeah, I mean, just to echo Robin's concerns, I mean, you know, the Cabinet Secretary said in the summer that the staff and students would be involved in the process, and I think we were, you know, deeply disappointed that the steering group does not include staff or students. And I think it was only when we made a significant amount of fuss and raised this with the Cabinet Secretary that we actually got to really get any more detail on what this group was and what they were doing. In November, UCU met with the two consultants of the group, and as Robin said, the consultants then did a tour of all the HEIs in Scotland, and it's true to say that some of our reps did have about half an hour with the consultants, and I should say that's half an hour which they were often in groups which included other representatives, so there would be Senate assessors or others involved, and it was a very short amount of time. No minutes were taken of those meetings, and I think our reps had real concerns about how meaningful those meetings could be. UCU generally has had a concern that the whole process has been trying to unpick some of the very good recommendations from the Von Prondinsky review. We felt that Von Prondinsky was a very detailed and thorough process, and I think we were quite concerned at what this new process on the code was trying to do. And I think that's why we've emphasised in our evidence the importance of scrutiny of the governance code, because it really is fundamental to making the change. So it's absolutely vital that we get the governance code right. So yeah, I think from our perspective, our engagement was clearly there has been, although we did ask to meet the actual steering group and indeed the chair, Lord Kelvin, but we never got to do that.
Mr Ennison, do you have anything you want to say on this?
Well, this is a question, I think, largely about the code that's being developed for the higher education sector.
I'm asking you because we're going along.
Yeah, but no, the point I'd make, and I made the point earlier, that I do think self-regulation through a code, albeit the code actually enforced through a conditional grant, would be a desirable route for the college sector to go as well, because it does seem to me to get the balance between what's been called responsible autonomy as well as proper accountability to Parliament as well.
Alistair.
Thank you. If I could just make two comments. One, really just responding to some of the portrayal of the relationship between university governing bodies and senior managers. I mean, if I could just speak in my capacity, both as a former university senior manager and as someone who works daily with university senior managers, the court is taken extraordinarily seriously. It's an extraordinarily testing experience. Bringing your proposals before a court, you expect a rigorous examination, you expect your evidence and your reasoning to be tested pretty severely. So I'm afraid from my own experience and the experience of my members, I'm really not recognising the portrayal that others are giving of the relationship between senior management and university governing bodies. On the specifics of how this code is being developed, University Scotland is rather to one side of this, since the steering group established by the Committee of Scottish Chairs is taking it forward. But what I'm aware of from what's happening in member institutions is that there's an extraordinarily intensive process of discussion going on at every institution. It's involving staff representatives, student representatives, lay members of the governing body, and really is getting that variegated view which takes account of that experience of people on the ground of how governing bodies are working at the moment and how they think the code can further embed transparency and involvement and accountability in university governance. So from what I'm seeing from my position, to one side of this work, it looks like pretty thorough footfall on the ground to find out what people are thinking and pick up the ideas about how we can make university governance even stronger.
Okay, thank you.
Just a comment. I think it does seem extraordinary that we have a steering group set up and yet we don't have any students or any staff representatives on it. I find that extraordinary.
Colin Beattie.
Just a couple of specifics. In EIS's evidence, they say they welcome the provisions that college principals will not be automatic ex officio members of the college boards, having the right, of course, to attend and address board meetings. Now, looking at other evidence that's been put forward, there seems to be no real consensus on that. Some are quite content with the way the bill is set out. Others seem to have no opinion, and one or two seem to think that college principals should have the right to be a member of the board. I'd be interested to know what the panel feels on that.
Belsi.
It is the considered view of the DIS Feeler Executive that principals should not be members of their board, whether it be a regional board or a regional college board. There is a belief that principals have had and exercised excessive power in some cases, and therefore that the clearer division between governors and managers is a good thing. However, the EIS also recognises that principals do need to be at the top table and they do need to have their views as the lead academic or lead teaching professional, that view does need to be expressed to the governing body because it is an important view, but it shouldn't be the sole voice of the profession given to that governing body.
In terms of the principle in particular, I think I'm not too fussed either way, I suppose. I think what can't be, if there is one member of management who has a case to make to be part of the governing body, then it is the principal. But what is absolutely no doubt about it, not acceptable, is in several universities where you can have 3 or 4 members of management, of principals and vice principals, who are ex officio part of the governing body. And that's something that clearly needs to be changed, and is one of the recommendations of Von Pronzinski, is that it's only the principal who is part of it. Similarly, you can often have in those university settings, you can have multiple members, people who aren't even members of the court, often dominating the discussion. There does need to be a shift away in terms of the role that executive officers have in those kind of court settings, and that needs to change. If the more or less the path continues in terms of college regionalisation, I think one of the key things to change in terms of the legislation is doing something about in particular the gender issue, and doing something to get gender balancing to take place in the college sector, because this is the only window of opportunity is this particular legislation. So this is the window to do it.
So your position in this is that you don't have actually a strong feeling about the principles? Yeah. Okay.
I mean, UCU's membership is primarily in higher education, so we haven't commented around principles of colleges and college governance. But I mean, I would agree with the points that Robin's made about university governance and the importance of the recommendations from Von Pronzinski in terms of trade union and student representation on boards, and indeed the important recommendations around addressing the gender imbalance in terms of governance, and looking for individuals to serve on governing bodies from a broad spectrum of society, because I think we've found that most of them come from a private sector business background, and that was clearly something that needed to be addressed to make governing bodies more reflective of society in general.
It seems to me that the legislation is a bit confused on this, because we had the Griggs review, which, without really any evidence, it seems to me, suggested that principals should not be members of governing bodies. And then we have the legislation which says, oh, well, we're not very sure, we're going to leave this up to the regional college boards, or we're going to leave it up to the assigned colleges. And you get a situation developing where some, probably the majority, would have, and others would not. That doesn't seem to me very consistent. But in terms of principle, I think it is desirable to have staff and student representative on the governing bodies of colleges. But I think if you have staff representatives, surely you should have the academic leadership of the college through the principal represented on the board as well. In the same way as I think in university courts, it would be beneficial for universities, it seems to me, to have their principal on the court as well. That seems to be an issue of principle and good practice.
Do you have any views, Alistair, on this?
Not particularly on college governance. I'd really just want to say, of course, there's a robust student and staff membership on university governing bodies universally.
Okay, thank you. I want to move on because we've got a lot to cover. I want to touch on the widening access part of the bill, and George, Adam, take us on.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning. One of the more exciting things about the bill is the access, widening access for students. Now, there appears with some of the evidence we've had almost like a two-tier approach with some of the universities, whereas you have ones like University of the West of Scotland who are doing well with getting people from different backgrounds, and other ones almost effectively only getting something like 3.3% of people from low socio-economic backgrounds. Now, the previous evidence we received, a lot of the principal says there's nothing to see here, we would eventually get there on our own. And then just directly after it, NUS representatives or student heads came on and said it would probably take about 40 years if it was left to the actual universities and institutions themselves. So there seems to be some debate within the sector with regards to this. Now, I'd like to ask most of the members what is their view on it, how do they see the way forward, and is legislation the best way forward?
Who wants to start us on that? Robin, do you wish to kick us off?
Yeah, I'll try and be brief as well. So I think legislation is really important here because there does need to be some sort of legislative underpinning to the outcome agreement process that's taking place. There needs to be something that makes it very clear that widening access is a responsibility of every single university. It's fundamental to what universities are about. Admitting those with the most potential to succeed well is fundamental to what the purpose of universities are, and it's therefore no problem at all asking them to do that and to do that through core funding. I think so the legislation has to happen. What's good about the process that is being set out is that the exact way in which that's enacted is still left to the individual institution. Every institution has said, you need to step up to the plate, you need to do more for Scotland on this issue. But how they exactly go about that, what kind of initiatives they use, is up to them. We're going to be supporting work by University Scotland that looks at some of the evidence base for this. And there are examples of good practice that are taking place in terms of widening access. Those things just need to be stepped up, done on a wider scale, and every university needs to do more.
Okay, I think from the EIS point of view, we do support legislation. I think it must be recognised that universities have done a lot of good work in widening access, particularly in recent years. However, some universities have moved faster than others. There's also, I think, a question mark as to how far the universities would have moved if they never thought that legislation was a possibility. The college articulation hubs are a very effective means of enabling wider access or of widening access. However, they're not agreed with all universities. In terms of legislation, I think that the balance of the bill is correct in that it effectively allows the outcome agreement to have a widening access agreement as part of it, and that gives the universities flexibility to deliver their own models for widening access. So the bill is not forcing a one-fit-all model. And I think that, unfortunately, the universities, if they had been left to themselves, then we would not get to a position where we would have consistent application of means of delivering widening access.
Yeah, UCU also supports the widening access requirements of the bill and also the way that this process is going to work through outcome agreements. I think what we think is really important is that there's consultation with staff and students in the development of outcome agreements, which would also include consultation on the widening access process. I mean, I think to date, in terms of outcome agreements, whilst we recognise that how these have been developed in universities, there's been very little time for consultation. We hope that if there could be a requirement within the bill to consult with staff and trade unions, that will help the development of outcome agreements as we move forward, because to date there's been little consultation with trade unions, and we recognise that that's because of the time factors and the way this has been rushed in to date.
Just a brief comment. I mean, I think, picking up on David's point, articulation has been quite patchy between the colleges and universities. It's excellent in some parts of the country, for example, the northeast of Scotland, less developed in other parts of the country. It is important that college students do have, and it's important for the taxpayer too, that we don't add on an extra year for these students, and it costs us and it costs the individual. So smoothing that articulation between college and university courses is very important. We think the legislation, if it helps that, is a desirable thing to do. Funding also, coming through a new arrangement that the Funding Council introduces, another way of encouraging that development.
If I could just comment, first of all, at a statistical level, I would like to observe that this is an area where as David Belsey has said, significant progress is being made, and to point out that over the past 6 years we've seen a 17% increase in students at university from the most deprived areas. to point out that similarly we've seen a 26% increase over that period in people articulating from college to university, and from those articulating with advanced standing, we've seen an improvement of nearly 38%. So this is an area where progress is being made across the board, and where we have stated as a sector a very clear commitment in our evidence that university principals are committed to university being equally open to any learner with the appropriate academic potential to benefit, regardless of their social or economic circumstances, and commitment to delivering progress in improving the university sector's record on widening access and retention. So there is a clear commitment, to what will always be a work in progress, to actually driving this forward. I think, reflecting on outcome agreements, which you mentioned, the first round of outcome agreements has shown significant progress in widening access. It wasn't an ideal process. The rules of the game were not made clear at an early stage by the Funding Council, so universities didn't understand whether they would be penalised for setting stretching ambitions. The second round, I think, will show even further progress, especially given that there are 1,000 funded places now being assigned to improve articulation, 700 to improve widening access more generally. And what we saw with the second round was universities were overbidding. They wanted to do more. If the Funding Council had been able to fund it, there would have been yet more places to enable widening access. And one thing that was particularly encouraging was the extent to which the research-intensive universities were taking that opportunity and actually overbidding for more places so they could extend their widening access activity. I think there's a lot of progress. It will always be a work in progress, I think, until the problems of our society more generally that limit people's attainment and aspiration from the early years onwards are resolved. We're not going to realise that full potential in everybody, but we're certainly committed, and we've expressed it in the evidence. As far as the bill is concerned, we recognise that the Scottish Government has made a manifesto commitment to legislate in this area, and what we are looking for simply is a technical level of amendment that recognises that widening access agreements are not something that should be pronounced from the Funding Council to universities, but genuinely should be a negotiated agreement.
Can I just pick, George, you any follow-up there?
I was just going to say, Alistair, on that note, the problem is with the idea of negotiating and trying to sort out with individual universities. The situation we have, though, is there is a massive gulf between certain universities. I don't like to mention the ones that always get mentioned, but certain universities and ones like the UWS and Paisley, where they seem to be retaining that. So, how would you manage that without actually having the legislation coming from the centre?
Even at the moment, there are wide powers for the Funding Council to impose conditions of grant on universities. But I think when I say negotiation, I don't mean something that hasn't got a hard edge. And I think we're in the amendment that we've been proposing to this legislation, we're not actually taking a hard edge away. But what we're saying is, look, each university has got its own strategy and mission, its own length of experience in what is working for it in terms of widening access. So I think that experience will be improved by the joint work we're doing with NUS to look at what's working in widening access. So the initiative, in a sense, should come from the institution to say, here's how we can go further on widening access and retention. But it's a hard-edged negotiation. The Funding Council has to consider, whether what the institution is proposing is actually representing the attainable degree of progress.
I think the most worrying divide for me at the minute isn't so much the divide in terms of those universities that have a poor track record and those that have a good track record. I think the division is between those who have responded very positively to this agenda in a constructive way, and those institutions that have responded very defensively and very like, oh, well, go on then, we'll do it if we have to kind of approach. And that's where there needs to be the right financial incentives, and there needs to be the right legislative incentives to make sure that all institutions do respond positively and constructively to this agenda with doing more. Crucial to the underpinning of all of this is that there's some sort of frequent reporting on this kind of thing, something like an annual review of widening access progress, to make sure that we are on track for getting to a situation of greater fair access in less than 40 years. A year ago, if things were carrying on at the current rate, it would take 40 years. Now, we don't know, but I would hope that the fact that some universities responded to this constructively, we're now on target for something better than that. But we need to, collectively as a nation, with the Parliament, providing that oversight, make sure we are on track for something quicker.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask just a very specific question to Mary Senior on this? In terms of your evidence, the UCU raised a very specific issue. You said there may be a need for a statutory duty to protect institutions and in particular admissions staff from libellous claims. Could you expand on why you said that?
I think we've, because we emphasise the need for greater contextualisation in admissions, and I think we're mindful that that sort of issue may create difficulties for people who feel that they're not getting into university for a specific reason. And having looked at the evidence that the committee has discussed previously, I know that you've considered the issue of displacement, and I think I was quite interested in terms of the witnesses' response to that, and how that, this is an issue of greater good. It's about widening access and ensuring that everybody that is able to participate in universities is able to access universities. So I think that's why we put that point in there, because it's just to ensure that the university isn't threatened by those sorts of claims, as it were.
Okay, thank you. Can we move on now with Liz Smith? Next question.
Yes, on the question of the UHI scenario, I know in the Colleges Scotland submission there was a concern about, because it is a very different structure, as to how that regional body would operate, at least on the funding basis. Could you just explain what your concerns are in detail on that, Mr Henderson?
I think the issue in the UHI really is the relationship between the centre and the constituent parts. The legislation will really give a lot of authority in terms of the provision of FE to the university. Now, I understand that it's not possible in the legislation to actually enshrine the idea of having an FE committee, and I do understand that the university proposed to have an FE committee where the chairs of all the colleges will serve on that committee. But that's going to be left to agreement, so there has to be some risks around that process, that the centre will not suck away too much autonomy from the local colleges. And that's really where the worry lies in the UHI. I think it's a tremendous institution. I think it's a tremendous development in Scotland to have this combination. And we've been talking earlier about the articulation between college and university. Actually, in the UHI model, we have a model where it is possible to start at a non-advanced level and go right through to the PhD level in a much more smooth way, perhaps in other parts of the country. So there are great advantages in UHI, but we have to be careful, I think, as we develop UHI, that the individual colleges don't feel that their autonomy is being pulled into Inverness, because we all know that Dunoon and Lerwick's a long way from Inverness, and the world looks different there.
Just on that point, as I understand it, the University Court effectively is the regional body in the UHI set up. Does that present any concerns about the accountability of the funding process? I mean, does that tie in with what you're saying about the colleges within UHI who feel slightly aggrieved that they might be on a university funding principle, maybe not on the basis of colleges?
No, I think it's the number of lines of accountability that are going to be in the UHI. The Funding Council will give the money to UHI. The UHI, by agreement, will delegate for the FE to the FE committee, and then the FE committee will decide how it goes to the constituent colleges. So the lines of accountability become much longer in that arrangement, and there are risks involved.
Just on the point, I mean, as you rightly point out, I mean, the colleges within UHI, as it stands just now, are very different entities, extremely different. How do you see the process of the negotiated settlements, if that's how we should describe them, taking place with obviously a university court? I mean, do you feel comfortable with the process that is set out in the bill as it stands just now?
It's very difficult to see, given that we have the UHI and the court, that you could have any other arrangement, actually. I think we were going to have to rely on the voluntary agreements that's drawn up between the colleges and the court, how this is going to operate, and that will critically depend on the extent to which the court do truly delegate their authority for making decisions on FE funding to the FE committee.
Would you therefore accept that the concern that's been expressed by some of the colleges' submission to us within UHI, that they are a little bit worried that some of their local delivery, which is absolutely even more crucial perhaps in UHI than everywhere else, might be lost a little bit or diminished?
I think that's bound to be a risk. It's the sensitivity of that machinery at the centre to making decisions and perhaps taking decisions away from the local level where the real risks lie.
Thank you.
Just on the same point, I mean, do you believe that there is a risk of any conflicts of interest here in the proposed set-up within UHI, given, particularly on the governance issue? Clearly, there are different governance arrangements for further and higher education, but it's within the one body that effectively will be overseeing that.
I don't think so. I think the arrangements for determining what happens in the higher education side in UHI are working reasonably well. I think it's when you come to FE provision, which tends by and large to be need to be delivered much more locally and have that diversity. If there was any risk of rationalising the curriculum to the extent that you were diminishing local provision because it was not economic, then I think that's a bigger risk in an area like the University of the Highlands and Islands, because people can't reasonably be expected to travel in the same way perhaps they might travel in urban areas.
Okay, thank you. Joan McAlpine.
Very much, Convener. Yes, this is the issue of the cap on tuition fees for students from the rest of the UK. Both Mr Parker and Ms Senior are quoted in the Herald newspaper this morning taking issue with the Committee of Chairs' suggestion that legislation is not needed for a cap. And I was particularly interested in, the language that you used. Ms Senior said the custodians of our world-class universities only seem to be interested in turning a profit. And Mr Parker suggests that the written evidence from the committee making this point highlights how out of touch people involved in university governance are with the students they're supposed to serve. That's obviously quite strong language, and I wondered whether if I could have, for the record, why you feel so strongly about that, and perhaps also a response from the universities.
I mean, I guess we do feel very strongly about this introduction of a market into Scottish higher education. Now, I guess in many ways we've sort of missed the boat because there's already students from the rest of the UK who are paying variable fees to study in Scotland. I think we principally oppose tuition fees. However, in terms of the situation that we're facing in Scotland, I think we felt that the least worst option would have been to set a flat rate fee for rest of UK students, which could have been agreed collectively and collaboratively within the sector, so that there isn't this, I suppose, market and competition for, and so as rest of UK students are not seen as such a cash cow as the potential is for them now. So I think that's why we're really concerned to hear that there was no, that the chairs of court did not wish to see the fee cap in terms of moving forward.
I think one of the benefits of devolution has been that it's created a healthy amount of competition between parliamentarians in Holyrood and Westminster across all parties to do things better in Holyrood in Scotland. And actually this is one area, albeit quite a small area, in which actually I think the current legislation as proposed goes beyond even the worst excesses of what the Westminster government are proposing. You've got a tuition fee cap that is actually, in fact, for a degree cost, even higher than it is for rest of the UK students who decide to stay in the rest of the UK. Equally on bursaries, there is in effect no regulation whatsoever proposed around bursaries in this legislation. That's something that even the Westminster government have recognised in terms of being important to mitigate the damage that the fee system can do, and we're already seeing is doing. So actually I think this legislation, in my view, needs to move back towards having greater regulation and greater control over what is ultimately the fault of Westminster, true as it may be. We've seen the creation of a market, and a market needs regulation, and that means that we need the fee cap to be brought lower, and we need greater rules and greater conditions around the amount of bursaries that are on provision.
If I might make some observations. I mean, on the fee cap, since June 2011, there's been a voluntary agreement in place between universities and the Scottish Government that universities will not charge rest of UK fees that were higher than the maximum allowed elsewhere in the UK, and that voluntary agreement was renewed again in January at a meeting of university principals, and that remains the policy until this legislation is introduced. And I think there has been, in the Herald coverage, a pretty severe misinterpretation of what the chairs of court were saying in their submission. I think they were talking about means and not ends, that they don't see a need for the fee cap to be enshrined in legislation, but I don't think anybody's arguing that universities should be charging fees that are ahead of the maximum elsewhere in the UK. I mean, that really wouldn't make sense, not least in terms of how you can compete in a market. I think.
So we're clear on this point, this misinterpretation, as you suggested. The reports that I heard this morning were that the chairs were calling for universities to have the freedom to decide how high or low their fees should be, which didn't sound like what they were saying was we want to determine how high or low our fees should be underneath the figure of the cap, which is a voluntary cap at the moment.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think to quote the chairs directly...
It was the radio I was listening to this morning, I have to say, not reading the Herald.
Yeah, I mean, to quote the chairs directly from their submission that's quoted in Herald, they're saying it's inconceivable that any governing body should set its fees at such a level that students would be discouraged from applying.
What problem then was setting the cap?
I think, I'm interpreting that, and you'll have to ask the chairs later.
I'm sure they will.
As really being a manifestation of the current policy that universities are not looking to charge a fee greater than is charged in the rest of the UK. And if you look at the average across Scotland, I mean, by our calculations, it's about 6,900 average fee. It's spectacularly below the average English fee. That's how principals and governing bodies have used their discretion. And we're working very closely with NUS at the moment to compare data on rest of UK fees and to look at what's being done on bursaries. And I think indicatively that's already showing that what is being provided in terms of being tested bursaries is well ahead of what's being provided in the rest of the UK. And I think that the idea that there is some sort of profiteering going on here is just bizarre. I mean, funded places were taken out of the system by the Funding Council for rest of UK students, and they were taken out using a peak year 2009-10, when the rest of UK population was particularly high. So it's actually proved to be extremely hard work for universities to recruit our UK students to a level that makes up for that lost income.
Okay, thank you. Joan?
Yeah, if I could go back to Robin and Mary, in the written evidence from the University College Union in Scotland, you make the point that it's actually the changes in the Westminster legislation that are out of kilter with Europe, and the English fees are the highest in Europe, and that Scandinavian neighbours don't charge fees at all, so Scotland is actually much more in line with the rest of Europe. Could you maybe just clarify the points that you seem to be getting to earlier, that this dilemma has come about because of changes in England and because Westminster's out of kilter, and also perhaps acknowledge the fact that the Scottish Government exists off a block grant from Westminster, which doesn't actually cover the fees of English students studying at Scottish universities.
I mean, yeah, I'm happy to say UCU opposes the Westminster system too. However, I think there was a choice in Scotland, and whilst clearly we welcome the fact that Scottish domiciled students, do not pay tuition fees. That's very welcome. We remain concerned that a market has been introduced for rest of UK students, and we do believe that there was an alternative of some sort of flat fee, which would be the same for every RUK student wherever they studied in Scotland, whereas what we now have is a market, and we should say that Scottish education is actually the most expensive, particularly if you want to study at St Andrews or Edinburgh, where they charge £9,000 per year, and for a 4-year, which is the normal undergraduate degree, that obviously is £36,000. So that's really problematic to us, and we're deeply concerned about that fact.
The point that I made latterly, the Scottish Government is funded by a block grant from Westminster, which doesn't actually cover the fees for students from the rest of the UK. Yeah. Would you accept that?
I do accept that, but I think our point, and Alistair referred to the fact that prior to 2012, the way that our UK students came to Scotland, there was an agreed fee level which went into a central pot and then was redistributed to all the universities in Scotland, whereas now our UK students are not included in the number of students that Scottish universities can recruit. So in effect, they can get as many or as few as they wish, and I think that's why we see those such as St Andrews and Edinburgh, who are obviously very keen to attract students from the rest of the UK. They can get as many as they so wish at £36,000 a head.
Likewise, we appreciate that the hand of the Scottish Parliament has been forced by Westminster, but I don't think the block grant or any other reasoning justifies a system which goes above and beyond, goes even worse than the Westminster system. Mary's pointed out the point about degree cost, but there's also around the point about bursaries. Again, across the board, the picture is actually fairly positive on average, but there are some institutions who, in response to an FOI legislation, couldn't even provide to us what they were doing in terms of bursaries. And we're going to work with the University of Scotland to get to the bottom of the evidence. But I suppose the question for me is, if we can't even find out through Freedom of Information Act requests, how on earth is a prospective student from the rest of the UK supposed to find out what bursaries are on offer from an institution?
Very briefly, Alistair.
Just two very brief observations. First of all, really to contest this most expensive degree in the UK business. I mean, I think when you look at England, about 30% or so of degrees are actually 4-year or greater length. You look at chemistry, engineering, medicine, veterinary medicine, whatever. So I would contest that factually. Secondly, I think on evidence base for students knowing what's available bursary, one of the things that's being developed at the moment and implemented is the key information set that universities are meant to put up about what they're offering course-wise and what the costs and bursaries are, and I think that provides a very good opportunity for there to be transparent evidence to students about what's on offer.
But in England, that's overseen by the Office of Fair Access, and we have no equivalent for that in Scotland, so I think that's something that needs to be addressed too.
Thank you. Neil?
Just in relation to John McAlpine's point, I doubt if the block grant covers the costs of students from France, Germany, Portugal, Spain or wherever, but we appear to accommodate them within our current budget.
I suspect that might be, well, I more than suspect that may be because of the EU legislation, Neil, but we're bound by that as we stand. Can I move on now to the next area, which was from Claire Adamson?
I'd like to just cover some of the issues surrounding data sharing. The original policy memorandum indicated that this was a database that would primarily be about students at risk of dropping out of the system, but from the evidence that was received from Skills Development Scotland, it seems to move towards a sort of whole database of information about Scottish students and providing a service, they say, from S3 onwards. And I really just want to get an indication of where you think we are in terms of data sharing, what implications, if any, there are for staff training and resources for institutions, and are you clear how this will help intervention for students at risk?
I can answer that one. Anything which we can do to help address the problem, the severe problem we have of young people dropping out of the system and not accessing education and training is desirable. Colleges don't have any problem about sharing data with SDS or others if it's going to be designed to achieve that goal. I think the problem, though, once you start designing data systems, is that they can often grow arms and legs and become a bit more complex than perhaps it was first envisaged. And I think that's the risk with the proposals in data sharing here, that we will end up with a system which will be probably more complicated and probably more expensive than we envisage. That's not necessarily a reason for not doing it, but it's a good reason, I think, to go into assessing what these costs and risks are, perhaps a wee bit more than we've been doing. I think it seems to me some of the expectations in this area is that, it's all going to be very straightforward and easy. History of, IT systems in the public sector have rather suggested that these things are seldom as easy as they seem.
Just to identify some of the potential benefits I see in effective data sharing, if effective data sharing is what happens, is the first round would be around providing a single application system for colleges, and that would enable us to identify and help prospective students into the right college course, and to give us all a stronger evidence base around the number of college places that we ultimately need. Certainly our view is that there's opportunity to increase the number of college places given the economic, unemployment situation. Similarly, there's also potentially something that could be done around identifying, in terms of helping with the widening access agenda, in terms of identifying high-performing school pupils, particularly in the kind of schools that often don't send many people on to university, and sharing that information with universities so that they could do more to support those people with applying to university. That would certainly help with widening access too.
I think from the EIS point of view, we support the principle, as indeed John, but like John has said on behalf of College Scotland, where the reality takes us is still unknown, and we do worry that staff will maybe required to fill in more forms, more bureaucracy, for which limited benefits to their teaching.
There's some, obviously, there's a bit of concern raised about where the universities sit in the data sharing, and obviously we've talked a bit about articulation hubs and things, and do you see the universities participating in this data sharing model?
Just very briefly, from the conversations that we've had with Scottish Government, what we understand is that they'll be able to recover the necessary data about university-level students from the Student Awards Agency for Scotland and Higher Education Statistics Agency. So, we're all in favour of transparency of data. From our discussion so far, we don't understand this as needing to be achieved through imposing new burdens on universities.
Can I clarify something? The policy memorandum that accompanies this bill talks about the provision of this database, and that it will effectively look at relevant young people at risk of disengaging from learning or training. Can any of the panel tell me how, in practice, a database will identify those who are at risk from disengaging from learning or training? How will it do that? Should I ask SDS that question? Well, it seems you're as clear as I am on that particular question. Do panel members have any, committee members, have any further questions on data sharing? Claire?
I think in evidence from Colleges Scotland, there was a concern about a financial implication for colleges in terms of adapting their own IT systems.
Yes, when I answered your question earlier, I think there is a risk that the costs of this have been underestimated, because I think it will be more complex to introduce than perhaps has been envisaged.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, can I thank the panel for coming along this morning? It's been very helpful in our consideration of the bill, and can I suspend briefly to allow the panel to change? Can I welcome members back to the second panel this morning, and can I welcome to the committee witnesses who will be focusing solely on the information sharing provisions of the Bill, Section 15. Marlon McGlynn, from Head of Operations West, and Alison Moore, Head of Strategy, Policy and Research, both from Skills Development Scotland. Good morning to you both. Can I invite you, I think, Alison, you're going to make a few opening remarks that you wanted to make.
Yes. Good morning, and thank you very much for inviting us to discuss this section of the bill with you this morning. We thought it would be useful at the outset if we gave a brief summary of our role in policy delivery, the purpose of the hub and the principal benefits, and the progress to date in developing it. As we indicated in our written submission, SDS plays a key role in contributing to the delivery of Scottish Government economic and skills strategy, and this includes supporting the delivery of a number of related policies, including the 16+ learning choices model, and more recently the Opportunities for All commitment. And as members will be aware, these are both aimed at ensuring that every young person is supported into a positive opportunity. And while the OFA commitment applies to all young people, the focus is on those at greatest risk of either not progressing into a positive destination on leaving school, or of disengaging from a positive opportunity at some later point. So in contributing to policy delivery in this area, we work in partnership with a range of bodies, including schools and colleges, to support all young people into a positive education, training or employment opportunity. Turning to the purpose of the Data Hub, since individual young people engage with different partners at different points in time, no single partner has a complete, up-to-date picture of their current activity or status. And this is the primary reason for having data sharing systems in place, so that we can share intelligence and ensure that no one slips through the net. And that is actually what did happen before the implementation of the 16+ learning choices model in 2010. And it underlined the need for collaboration and for robust systems and shared processes to track and monitor individuals to ensure they get the right support at the right time to make positive transitions between learning and work. And it was at this time that SDS was tasked by Scottish Government with developing the Data Hub as the central mechanism for sharing this information. And to pick up on some points that I think have already been raised in the course of committee deliberation on the bill, it's important to recognise that the Hub is a solution to the fact that partners have a variety of different client management IT systems, as you would expect. It provides a central point to enable us, and together with partners, to bring together the core information on each individual. The Hub is therefore an important tool in sharing and coordinating knowledge of young people's participation and ensuring that there's continuous support available, particularly at points of transition such as leaving school or leaving college, where the gaps in collective partner knowledge are most likely to arise. And it's at these points that SDS is able to identify individuals through the shared information, identify individuals who've dropped out of positive activity, and working with partners to ensure that appropriate follow-up action is taken. So in this way, the Hub facilitates early intervention to support a young person back into work or training or education. So the key benefits of the Data Hub, as we see it, are it helps to remove gaps in knowledge about what young people are doing. It provides a more complete and up-to-date data set, and this then supports more effective delivery and ultimately a better service for young people. Overall, it means that more young people are supported into positive destinations, and finally, it provides more accurate information on young people's choices and transitions to support further development of policy. So we believe that the provisions in this bill are very important in supporting this process, and Section 15 increases the priority attached to the data sharing process by moving it from its current voluntary basis to a statutory basis. And we believe that this can only make the shared information more accurate and more robust. In terms of progress, very briefly, the position is that in addition to our own information on engagements with young people, the Hub currently receives information from local authorities, colleges, the Department of Work and Pensions, and the Student Awards Agency for Scotland. And within SDS, we are currently finalising work that will enable all of this information to be combined with our own client management system to produce up-to-date records, which will then enable us to share a combined set of information with relevant partners. So in summary, we believe it's an essential tool in supporting young people's transitions, and that this is already being demonstrated through some really positive experience of joint working with our partners. And we're therefore fully supportive of the terms of the bill, as it can only strengthen the basis for data sharing and maximise the chances of young people progressing into positive opportunities. And I hope that's been a helpful overview, and of course we're now happy and ready to respond to the questions.
Thank you very much for that, Alison. You'll have heard, I think you may have heard the question I asked the last panel towards the end of the previous session. Can I ask you the very same question, which effectively is that the policy memorandum states that this database or data hub will help young people, it will identify young people at risk from disengaging from learning or training. How will it do that?
Does it give us the information that someone has dropped out of college, for example?
No, sorry, I heard you say that during your opening statement about somebody dropping out.
Yeah.
Now, somebody dropping out isn't at risk from disengaging. They have already disengaged, past tense. What it says in the policy memorandum is young people at risk of disengaging from learning or training. How does the database or the data hub identify those at risk of disengaging?
Well, it identifies those at risk because we have lots of information on them, because we've got it from all partners. Therefore, we can see young people who might have a lot of barriers that have prevented them from continuously going to education. So in school, they might have had interrupted learning, so we would know that they might do that in college as well. So we can support them by our work coaches, for example, following them when they go into college and making sure that they've got contact with them on a regular basis to see that there's no issues. If a young person comes onto our list as having dropped out of college, it doesn't mean that we can't quickly get them back in if we can put the right support in place. Whereas before, it might have been months before we would have known that a young person had dropped out. Now we know it would know it on a monthly basis, so we can find out why they dropped out. Is it possible for them to get back in and re-engage? That wasn't possible before, but it's much more possible now for them.
I have no problem with that. I think that's an obvious step forward in the speed of delivery of the information about somebody who has dropped out, and then your attempt to support and re-engage them with education and training. I think that's tremendous. But what I'm trying to get to the bottom of is how you identify through a data hub. I'm struggling to understand the policy memorandum's thinking here. It sounds to me that it's been rather oversold as a method of identifying those at risk, because I can't, for the life of me, see in practical terms how a data hub can identify those who are at risk. I can see how teachers might do that, I can see how lecturers might do that, I can see how student support people might do that. I struggle to understand how a collection of data can do that, other than, and you gave one example I could think of, which is past history of previous dropouts, or effectively behaviour, a pattern which would be in a record, or might be in a record, might not be in a record. Such should be collected by the data hub. So I'm just trying to get clarity around that point.
So what the data hub will hold over time is a history of a young person's destinations. So if a young person leaves school and goes to a training provider and drops out from that, and then goes into a college course and drops out from that, you start to see a pattern that there's obviously issues that are preventing them from continuing in any opportunity that they go into. So we would have that information. So if that young person comes into SDS, for example, what we would want to find out then is, well, what's causing this pattern? Is it things within yourself, because you just feel that you can't cope when you're there? Is it your motivation, confidence? Or is it issues other places, like, for example, you've got caring responsibilities, you've got interrupting housing situation? We're then able to find out what the barriers are and to help to remove those barriers to support them. Whereas just now we would all be sitting with our own information and bits of the jigsaw. Hopefully Hub gives us all the pieces of the jigsaw.
I'm sorry, Alison, do you want to contribute?
Just going to add to that, all of the partners have their own client management systems, and within those systems many of them hold a field which tells them something about the individual that might indicate that they have particular needs or that they are going to be at risk. So that information is held in the constituent systems. As far as the hub is concerned, we hold one variable on there, which is a flag that this particular individual may have some issues and may put them at risk, and that is then followed up there's not any detailed information for data protection reasons, but a flag that there may be something here which can then be followed up in face-to-face discussion between partners. So it's a source of information as part of a wider engagement between partners.
I'm keen to bring other members in, but I'm still slightly struggling with this. But can I ask two quick questions, and then I'll bring in Claire Adamson to move us on. Can you tell me how many young people will be in this? How many young people will be in this database? What size is this database?
Into the database each year will come about 60,000 young people. So if you were to look at a 10-year period of 16 to 24, you'd have 600,000 young people over time will be on the database. And that's roughly the amount of young people leaving schools in Scotland every year.
Right. That's a massive database. I mean, that's a big bit of work, it seems to me. How many staff do SDS have to monitor and support, one, the database, and two, the actual young people, and do the work of identifying, monitoring, supporting?
If I could just say about and first of all, about the number on it and your concerns over that. A lot of those young people will go into positive destinations each year, and if after a period of time they're not coming back to us for support, then their records might well be archived. They'll be able to be brought back immediately if the young person comes back in. But really what it allows us to focus in is all of those young people that are not in an opportunity at any given time of that 600,000, and that would be
Let me rephrase the question then. How many active records will you be looking at?
Well, if you took each year, there's about 7,000 young people that leave schools in Scotland that don't have an opportunity in leaving school. So again, you know, you've obviously got a churn in that. The 7,000 that leave at a particular date, they don't have an opportunity.
Sorry, maybe it's me. You said a moment ago there was 60,000 a year coming onto the system.
Yeah.
And now you've said there's 7,000.
They don't have an opportunity when they leave school.
Yeah, but, sorry, are the 60,000 the active records, or is it just the 7,000?
The 7,000 would be the actively working with us records. The 60,000 would be the young people that left school that year. You know, there'll be 28% of them will go to university, so many go to FE, you know, and so on. So they're already in an opportunity. But the 7,000 will be the people that are actively seeking an opportunity.
Okay, Claire Adamson.
A couple of quick clarifications. Does that mean that the database effectively is a record of every pupil in Scotland?
Yes.
And we had a wee discussion about it growing arms and legs. I take it is not designed to be an application point for college courses, as I don't know if you were here when Robin Parker was here. So it's not going to be anything like a UCAS system or anything, a portal for application, no?
No, but the information that it might well give to colleges is, for example, around multiple applications. So at present, there's young people that apply for college and rightly apply for more than one course because they might be the same course on at a couple of colleges. Now, they might get an offer from both and turn one down.
So that would be incumbent, because you've already said it's coming from a whole load of different databases, so that would be incumbent on the hub being able to identify a person that exists in several databases of the partners. How are you uniquely
What we would show when the college got the information off, what they would see is, you know, John Smith didn't start a course in their college and they don't really know why, but now they see why, because they can see that John Smith is in another college and has started a course.
How are you uniquely identifying that person across different databases?
There isn't actually a single unique identifier, but it's a combination of name, address, date of birth and Scottish candidate number that we use to perform the matching process.
And in terms of some of you said there was at-risk information there. Obviously, for some of the students that may have come from the care system, for instance, they could well have multiple addresses in different systems and multiple. So how are you going to really track down on pupils who and students who have had a sort of multiple changes in their life and in their addresses and things?
Hopefully by giving them continuous support and knowing where they go and liaising with our colleagues in social work departments, for example, who also share, not through the data hub, but share with us on an annual basis information on looked after and accommodated young people, just for example. But we would, all young people who are looked after and accommodated would have coaching support from us on leaving school, and we would try our very best to continue to track them, and do in most cases be able to do that.
Obviously, at the moment, obviously, if someone drops out of a college course, the college will know that that has happened, and they will have, hopefully, mechanisms to try and identify what has happened to that young person. But you're saying that this will allow Skills Development Scotland to identify and flag people who are at risk of dropping out of the whatever positive destination they're in. Does that mean Skills Development Scotland is taking on the responsibility for looking at retention in colleges? Is that an extension of what you do at the moment?
We're not looking to take on the retention in colleges. What we're looking to do is support the individual. You know, so if that has an added support for the colleges, then that's fine. But really what we're looking to do is keeping young people in a positive opportunity and making sure it's the right one for them. So our focus really is on the individual.
Finlay.
Could I ask how the system works at the moment? How do you record information at the moment?
In the data hub?
Let's say it's work that SDS does with schools.
If we see, we have our own client management system, as I've explained, all of the other partners do. So we have a wide range of information on our clients in our own client management system, as do other partners. And the hub is collecting only a subset of information from partners and pulling it together.
Maybe I'm not being very clear. Let's say an SDS advisor goes into a school, gives a presentation to a year group on, is it the skills framework, skills management framework or whatever it is?
Career management skills.
It's careers management skills, right? To a year assembly, and does the introduction to My World of Work to that group, which is what happens regularly.
No, that's no.
Or to a class.
To a class.
Let's say it's to a class.
Right. So if I take you through that process, yes. So it would be a class of 20 to 30 young people, because it's an interactive workshop. It's not just a talking at them. So career management skills is about introducing them to how to become a good career planner. And the follow-on workshop that they get is on My World of Work. It's been an environment where there's tools for them to help them to become an effective career planner. We would record that in their records on our.
So how long is that session for those two?
40 minutes to an hour for each of them.
Right.
So up to 2 hours.
So within the record of each pupil, you would go to your database or the school's database and tick 2 boxes and say they've had that and they've had that.
Yeah, our database.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So there'd be some box would be checked to say that.
It would be what we call, for the purposes of our records, an intervention.
Yeah.
So it would record that we've seen that young person in a group session, and it would record that it is a group session and what the intervention's been.
Okay. Moving on then, let's say an individual has left school and gets a job.
Yeah.
How is that recorded?
That's recorded during the school leaver destination return.
But let's say there's a gap.
Sorry, if there's a gap.
It's a year after they left school. 6 months after they left school.
That would still be recorded in the school leaver destination return. We contact all young people in Scotland each year. In the year of their leaving, whether they left in the winter or the summer, they're all contacted to see where they are now.
Presumably you don't get 100% return on that.
We get pretty near to it. We get in the high 90s return.
So if someone's in, let's say they're at college, and then they get a job, how is that followed up? Is there the same type of survey done?
We do a 6-month follow-up, so we do the first survey in October of each year, and then we follow up in March, because obviously we're trying to find out, did they just have a first opportunity that didn't last, and they might well now be unemployed, so we need to find that out. So we follow that up again in March.
And in terms of the caseload of an advisor or skills development, I find that sometimes can't follow what their latest title is. I think they're a coach or something these days, but whatever their job title is, what kind of caseload would they have?
Depends on their job role. So if in school, they would be dealing with the young people in that school. But if for those with more intensive needs that need a lot more one-to-one support over a period of time, we now have the work coach role. Now their caseload over a year would be a maximum of 30 people, and that would be changing over the year, obviously, as some people came onto their caseload and some came off. But our expectation is that an average of 6 months support for those young people. So a maximum of around 30 people they'd work with in the year.
So, okay, I'll come back to that maybe later. And just one of the things that you mentioned, that there's the interface between the DWP, the Student Awards Agency for Scotland, 32 local authorities. Who else? Who was the other ones? In terms of the data?
SAS.
Student Awards Agency.
Yeah.
And I understand that some of that work has been done, but the financial memorandum says that the figure quoted to make all this happen is 52 grand. I mean, I don't know what kind of IT project, you know, you wouldn't get a consultant to go out of bed for that these days. Has the huge majority of all the interfaces and all the technical stuff that has to be done to make all this work been done, and what was the cost of that to date?
In terms of the development cost, we don't have that detail to hand. But we
can you provide the committee with it, please?
We can do that. In terms of the sum that is quoted in the financial memorandum, that is the work that is needed to enable partner systems, export the agreed shared data in a format that can be read into the hub. So that's what that covers, and we believe that that is adequate. Many of the partner client management systems can already create the subset of information in a format that can be read into the hub. It's where there are some technical issues to be resolved to enable that, the correct file format, that the 52,000 will help with that.
Sounds like a bargain.
Liz Smith.
Could I possibly ask, when the committee has taken evidence on other issues, one of the things we've been asked to do is to make sure that the proposed recommendations for a change to data processing is consistent with other legislation in this area, particularly on data protection. Could I just ask for your assurance that that has been investigated and that Section 15 of the bill is totally consistent with other legislation?
Well, we have very clear policies and procedures for the handling of data and compliance with the Data Protection Act. And the physical data in relation to the hub is held in an accredited data centre which complies with all of the relevant quality standards and is subject to regular audit.
There are no concerns at all that there would be some inconsistencies with this legislation with any other form of...
Not aware of any concerns.
Thank you.
Joan McAlpine.
If I could just take you back about 10 minutes now when you were answering Mr Finlay's questions. I was struck by the point that you made about young people who'd applied for several different college courses and the difficulties in ascertaining data as a result of that. Does that mean that some of the figures that we've heard in the past about so-called college waiting lists, it doesn't sound to me as if there's a system in place that can really accurately reflect young people's, who might be waiting for college courses, because it sounds as if there's a lot of duplication and so on at the moment. So would you perhaps confirm that and say whether the system in future will be able to improve on that and give us more accurate figures?
The system at the moment, in terms of the Data Hub, only collects information from colleges on enrolments and withdrawals. It doesn't hold information on waiting lists.
And it wouldn't do that in the future. It would require a common application process by colleges to give them that information.
So there isn't really any way of saying, whether there are or aren't waiting lists for college. There isn't a way of accurately totting that up, is there?
Well, it's not the purpose of the hub to do that, no. I think.
I was just going to ask about, you mentioned earlier about and we heard in the previous evidence session about SAS providing the information on young people going to university. I just wanted to ask why do you feel SAS are the most appropriate people to share that data as opposed to universities themselves, and the reasoning behind that?
I think it's been recognised that that is the least burdensome way for the data on enrolments and withdrawals to be provided. If the data is already held by SAS, it makes more sense to get it directly from them rather than going to each individual institution.
I suppose the reason I was asking the question is if your objective is, or one of your objectives is to identify people at risk of dropping out or disengaging, would it not be better to get the information from the universities as opposed to SAS? For example, would SAS tell you who the young person's advisor of studies would be, for example?
No, the data from SAS at the present time is only on withdrawals, and there are plans later in the year to capture information on enrolments.
I mean, do you think that would be helpful if Skills Development Scotland did know who the young person who went to university's advisor of studies is? Because often, you know, they'll speak to students and see if there's any problems. And
careers guidance within the university is offered by a career guidance service, ICAS, and in actual fact they would follow up on any young people who drop out. We would come into contact with them if they come into our centres looking for support. But in the first 2 years of leaving university, they're generally served by the University Career Guidance Service. That's not to say that we don't give them, and we do it because if students have gone elsewhere for their university course then, and they come back home having come out of it, then they would tend to come to us rather than go to the university. But there's a very good follow-up service by the universities of anyone that drops out.
And just in follow-up to what Neil Finlay was asking earlier, in terms of the caseload and being around 30 for each careers advisor, how many careers advisors do you currently have or will have?
I wasn't talking about the caseload for careers advisors, I was talking about the caseload for work coaches.
Work coaches,
which will be a mixture of people who were previously key workers and careers advisors. And you know, we could get you the figures for that if you wish.
That'd be great, thanks.
Sorry, can I follow up? Just, could you explain the difference between a work coach and a careers advisor?
Yes, the services that we offer are of an intensity depending on the needs of the young person. So we offer in school a career coaching service which will, you know, offer a number of interventions to a young person depending on their needs, and that's really around can they take information and make good decisions from it, or do they need guidance to go through that process? Now, they might be seen 6, 8 times in school on average, but if that's not really worked for them and there's still other barriers that are preventing them really from taking up an opportunity, then we might make the decision on leaving school that they'll get the support of a work coach. That's very much aimed at young people that we've described already as, you know, perhaps are being looked after and accommodated, have problems at home, you know, they might have caring responsibilities, they might previously have been in custodial care, all the barriers that can prevent young people from making a good transition. So we would offer them the support of a work coach, which would give them a weekly support, more than once a week if it was required. They would also support either the employer or the learning provider that young person takes up the opportunity with, to do everything to make sure that young person is able to sustain. So it's a very intensive support. Whereas some young people leaving school might have good qualifications, ready to take up an opportunity, might decide to take their summer holidays first before they do that, and might miss the boat, so end up coming in looking for an opportunity when there's perhaps less available. They'll get the support of a career coach to get them back on track and into a positive opportunity, but they won't need the same intensive support of young people needing a work coach.
Okay, thank you. Can I take you back to the process of how the data will transfer? How often will the data be refreshed? In fact, how often will you get a data file from these various organisations?
The data at the moment coming from local authorities for schools is refreshed every 2 weeks, and so it is pretty up to date.
And the other organisations?
They're just coming in at the moment, so that data is still being worked with. The colleges have been coming in, and the hope will be that they will been a 2-week turnaround basis, because for the report to be accurate with all the information, that has to happen. Obviously, the information coming in at the moment from DWP, for example, has to be analysed and seeing if we need all that's coming in or if the fields are right, to make sure that it's accurate when it goes back out. So that's not yet going back out in report, but it's coming. We had our first lot came in a month ago from DWP.
And so will all of the organisations who supply, will all of them be on a fortnightly?
We would hope so.
Yeah, I want to push you on this. I mean, hope so is not quite the same as it will be. You've already got schools on a fortnight, colleges you hope to have on a fortnight, and DWP sounds like a hope as well, but not quite as strong as the one on the colleges. Is it your understanding that it will be on a fortnightly basis, or if it's not, it's an expectation or a hope? Who is it that determines the cycle? Do you not tell these organisations what the cycle should be?
Yeah, and we agree that with them, but at the moment it's not compulsory for them to do that. You know, they give us the information at the moment because we have a data sharing agreement with them. One of the things that a statutory bill will do is allow us to have that cycle and be confident that it will happen.
So your expectation, assuming the bill is passed, is that you will be getting that information on a fortnightly basis from all these organisations? Yes. Your expectation. On the same issue, how do you ensure the accuracy of the information that you are receiving from these organisations and is now in your data hub?
You can only hope that their records are up to date and accurate, for example, and change the business rules if there's any issues around that make our information, for example, maybe a bit more accurate than theirs. It's all about the last time that someone had contact with the young person. So if you're doing it on a fortnightly basis, you would expect that theirs is as accurate and up to date as ours is, and therefore, it should be robust.
Yeah, we're certainly working on that basis, that partners are maintaining their own systems for their own business purposes, and therefore the data will be as accurate as it needs to be for their purposes. It's not our role to check it all.
That's why I was asking. So it's not your role to check the data that's coming in.
No.
You accept the data has been checked by the
Yes.
other organisations. What effectively do you do to ensure that happens, though? I mean, do you know for a fact that they check it? How often they check it? What are their levels of accuracy that they have in their business?
No, we don't, but it's in their best interest to obviously have accurate information. So if they're not checking it, then, rubbish in,
do you
rubbish
ask them
out.
for checking it?
Oh, absolutely. That's part of the agreement with them, is that they're putting in robust information.
Right, so there's an agreement in place that effectively determines the level of accuracy that you would expect to be coming out of it.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that it's up-to-date, accurate information.
Okay. Yeah. What's the level of accuracy that you expect?
That it's the most recent contact that they've had with that young person, and it tells us what happened from that.
No, sorry, maybe you misunderstood me. Recent information is not necessarily accurate information. What I'm asking is, does the agreement state the level of accuracy you would expect, and any checks of that, any data that's coming in for accuracy would provide that it would be, 98% accurate, or whatever the figure happens to be?
No, I don't believe we have that, but we can check that for you.
Okay. I think it would be helpful, I certainly would find it helpful if we had some detailed information about how those agreements operate and how that data transfer works.
We can certainly get that information
That would be
for
helpful, I think. Does the committee have any other questions you want to ask at this stage? Claire Adams.
I'm a bit... I can understand what information everyone's giving apart from the DWP in terms of this. If you've got the record for every pupil in Scotland and they've got a destination flag at some point, is it possible for them to drop out of all of these partner databases completely?
Yes, I would guess it is. There's always young people that could fall through. You can do your absolute best to get information on everybody that's out there. But, for example, young people that are 16 to 18 who are unemployed but are not in receipt of benefits, then, we can perhaps fall through the net sometimes because they're not registered with DWP. They might, their family circumstances are that they're not going to claim any benefits, and they might not be looking for a job at that point in time. So there can be some young people, there's always gaps.
And you mentioned that in all of the feed-ins, you didn't mention employers, but then you did mention that employers would be providing information. In that context, you mean employers that are engaged with you already in some like Rathbone or other organisations in providing training opportunities?
No, employers won't be putting data into the data hub. I mentioned employers in terms of our support to them by work coaches if a young person went into an opportunity.
So how will you identify someone who's fallen off a training programme then?
That comes into our CTS database where we have young people recorded that are in training. And that also feeds into the hub, so we have accurate information on who comes off of training.
If someone was a serial engager with employment but failing to secure a long-term employment position, you wouldn't be able to capture that from the hub?
No, not necessarily if they weren't engaging with us, no. Unless they were claiming benefits in between times.
We could identify them through the DWP records potentially on an unemployment register.
Okay, thank you. I think everybody's quite happy with the questions we've asked. It would be helpful if you supply the information you've indicated earlier. You would supply in some of the more detailed information about the system, how it works. I'm not sure about other members, but I'm always keen on flow diagrams, so that might help if us understand how this process works. But I would be grateful if you could supply that information as soon as you're able to. Thank you very much for coming this morning. It's been most helpful, and I'll suspend briefly. Good morning and welcome back. To the committee this morning we have our third panel of witnesses who are here to discuss provisions on higher education governance. We have Tony Bryan, Chair of Glasgow Caledonian University, Stuart Munro, Chair of University of Edinburgh, and Alan Simpson, the Chair of the University of Stirling. Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for coming along this morning. Alan, I believe you've got a brief opening statement you want to give us.
Yes, well, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting us along today to give evidence. As has been mentioned, I'm Alan Simpson, the Chair of Court at the University of Stirling, and I also chair the Committee of Scottish Chairs of HEIs. On my left is Stuart Munro. He's the Vice-Convener of the Court at University of Edinburgh, and Tony Bryan, who's, as well as being the Chair of Court at Glasgow Caledonian, is on the steering group who is preparing the new Code of Governance. We're here representing the Committee of Scottish Chairs, and you'll have seen the written evidence that we submitted on the bill. As chairs of court were ultimately responsible for the governance of our universities, it's the principals who are responsible for their management, and so we're therefore primarily concerned in the parts of the bill related to the governance of universities, namely sections 2, 3, 4 and 14. There are really three fundamental points we'd like to make. First is that we fully support the need for good governance. All the chairs do. We support accountability and the need for accountability and really the overall intentions of what's included in the bill. But the second point is that all the proposals contained in the bill relating to governance we believe have been achieved in the past and can continue to be achieved without the need for legislation. And the third point is the proposals as drafted go far beyond, we believe, the stated intentions and could seriously erode the autonomy of higher education institutions in Scotland. As written, the bill would allow a minister in the future to specify any principle of governance or management that he believes is good practice. I think it might be worthwhile clarifying what we mean by governance. There are basically four elements to governance, and these are taken from the von Pronczynski Review. First is the effective stewardship of the university to secure its sustainability over the medium and long term. Second is safeguarding the mission of the university and the services it provides for the public benefit. Third is securing the proper and effective use of public and other funds. And fourth is ensuring stakeholder participation and accounting to the wider society for institutional performance. I think it's generally accepted that there's no particular problem of governance in Scotland at the moment that needs to be solved. Standards of governance in this country are high, and this is reflected in the international standing of our universities. We believe that autonomy is one of the bedrocks of a successful sector, and we see the bill as currently drafted as being a very real threat to this autonomy. But why is autonomy important? All institutions need to be able to react to external pressures and opportunities in ways that are appropriate to them. And with the diversity of the sector, the reactions will be very different in different institutions. There are numerous studies that have shown that the success of an institution is linked to its autonomy, and throughout Europe, universities are being given greater freedom so they can emulate the success of universities in Scotland and the rest of the UK. As the Cabinet Secretary has said, the need for accountability and the need to protect institutional autonomy are not conflicting principles. It's also important to understand that concepts of good governance are constantly evolving, so what we consider excellent practice today will be standard practice in the future. There's great diversity between different institutions in Scotland, ranging from, say, the University of Edinburgh to the Royal Conservatoire or the Open University in Scotland. To have rules that apply absolutely to everyone is virtually impossible, so the concept of comply and explain is essential. As you know, chairs have taken a lead in arranging for a steering group to prepare a code of governance that would apply to Scottish universities. At present, all HEIs adopt the code of governance that were prepared in 2009 by the Committee of University Chairs covering the whole of UK. But the von Pronczynski Review challenged the sector to be more open and transparent in a number of ways, hence the preparation of a new code for Scotland. Such a code will reflect the recommendations of the von Pronczynski Review, but will go broader into other areas of governance not covered by the review. The chairs believe that once a code has been prepared, it will form a benchmark of good practice that will be an exemplar for the rest of the world. We recognise it's difficult for you to consider a code of governance that hasn't yet been published, so let me explain the timescales. After the publication of the von Pronczynski Review in February last year, the chairs met and agreed that as we were responsible for governance of the institutions, we should take a lead in developing a code of governance for Scotland. We checked with the Funding Council, who were the other body who might wish to undertake the work, and they were content with this approach. We then met with the Cabinet Secretary in May when we discussed the membership of the steering group, and this is chaired by Lord Smith of Kelvin, and the other external members are Dame Elish Angelini and Simon Pepper. I can give further information on the members of the group if you would like. The terms of reference were finalised for the steering group in August, and you've seen a copy of them. The date for completion of the code in the terms of reference is specified as spring of this year. And at the time that we produced the terms of reference, we had no idea that there would be a bill covering governance that would be running in parallel with this. Consultation has been an extremely important part of the preparation of the bill, and meetings have been arranged at all higher education institutions, bar one, which was a problem of getting dates. Consultations finished 2 weeks ago, and the code is still due to be published in early April. There's then going to be an opportunity for people to comment on the code and supply additional evidence before it's finalised and implemented for the next academic year, which starts on August the 1st. So it's quite a tight timescale from now until August to get it published and comments in.
Okay, thank you very much, Alan, for that. That's very helpful, and I'm pleased you've answered one. I'm sure one of the early questions, if not the first question, was when the publication date of the draft code would be. So we're now talking about early April. So that would be, as I understand it, before stage 2. Is that correct? I was going to check.
Well, it'd just be after it'd be after stage 1.
Yes, but before stage 2, which was what originally the officials said. So that's in line with what the officials told us. Can I just check something? Some of the language that you've used, both today and in your written submission to the committee, feels a bit apocalyptic. It would seriously erode autonomy. It would be a real threat. I mean, I won't read them all out, but effectively, that's the language that's used both in your opening statement and in your submission. What makes you believe that this bill has such apocalyptic conclusions?
Well, we believe that the principles of good governance should be developed in a collegial manner with the sector, with discussions with people. But what the bill actually states is that the Scottish ministers would have the powers to impose any principles of governance or management which appear to them to constitute good practice. Now, that's an imposition from outside. It's an imposition by political control, effectively, and we believe that that is a retrograde step in what has been recently a form of governance that is accountable. The term responsible governance has been used, and responsible autonomy has been used already today, and we believe that that is the way forward. And it's trying to strike a balance between the independence and autonomy of universities and their accountability.
I accept that. Sorry, Tony.
I'll just add one other very, very quick thing. It was just simply that if the Parliament and the Government are keen to legislate in this area, then we would support the suggested amendments that were put forward by University of Scotland, which Alistair Sim mentioned earlier, in terms of the drafting of it, which we think would make it a much more acceptable approach.
Given the approach, as I understand it, would be, irrespective of any possible future amendments to Section 2, etc., is that it's not an imposition as such. The ministers would not decide arbitrarily what would happen. There would be a discussion. Your bodies, the chairs, effectively are involved in the process of setting up the guide. That is, being done by yourselves and others. We've heard already that you've been going around all the institutions. You mentioned it yourself. So I'm struggling to understand where the imposition comes from. Surely what we're talking about, and I'm looking at Section 29A here, is effectively requiring institutions to comply with the principles of good governance. That surely is not unreasonable.
I think the issue particularly is around the wording, convener, that this would seem to be able to give future ministers the ability to choose any code of governance which they so wanted to apply, whether it was relevant to higher education or came from another sector. And there seems to be no requirement in this wording, as I understand it, and I'm not a parliamentary draftsman, but as I can understand it, for consultation, for it to relate to a generally accepted code for the higher education sector, where it comes from another country or whatever. There just doesn't seem to be that kind of constraint around it.
Your concerns lie around the fact that it isn't contextualised effectively to ensure that any codes of guidance or good governance are within that kind of context.
If the Parliament and Government are keen to legislate in this area, yes.
Absolutely,
yes, that's where it's
Liz Smith.
Thank you, Convener.
As parliamentarians, we have to make a crucial decision, and part of this bill is about whether we should legislate for governance or whether we believe that a non-legislative process is going to provide the assurances that you've given in terms of better university education. That decision, I believe, has to be made on the facts. And at the moment, we are missing one set of facts, namely, we do not know what the new Code of Governance is going to be, and it's coming on the April of this year. That makes our decision rather difficult. Would you be able to say at this stage what it is about the new Code of Governance that might allay some of the concerns that were raised this morning by groups like UCU and the NUS, who felt that perhaps the governance wasn't as good as it might be?
You want to cover that?
I'm best fitted to answer that one, and I apologise because I think my answer will probably be seen as unhelpful, but I'm afraid it's just too early in the process for us to do so. I know. I thought I'd just leave with my chin. I do apologise, but it's just so early in the process. The consultation process finished at the end of last month. In fact, to be honest, the 1st of February, i.e. this month. The two experts, external experts that we engaged as the steering group to help us do this work are now away assessing that evidence. The plan is they will come out to the steering group at the end of this month with their first conclusions and probably some draft wording. We will then have I could only describe as a fairly packed March, where we try and go through various iterations and meetings to try and come up with a code to meet that early April, a draft code, to meet that early April timeline that we've been talking about. So I apologise, we have just not got to that stage in the process yet for me to be able to say what the differences will be in detail. Clearly, we recognise that there is a desire for the code to embody more openness and transparency than perhaps the previous one did. And as I think Alan hinted in his introductory wording, the previous code which has served us extremely well, we believe, since it came out in 2009. But it was 2009, and the governance world itself generally has moved on. We also have the review that was completed last year by Professor von Brzezinski, which obviously is very informative and will form one of the core elements and inputs. But a code itself goes much wider than what von Brzezinski actually covered. This is the current code that we have. Not all of this document that I'm waving here is specifically on governance, but there's about 20 or 30 detailed pages of a governance code and supporting principles. And we clearly, if we're doing a Scottish code, we have to replicate what's in there. So it goes much broader than just the von Brzezinski thing. So we're looking at a number of key inputs.
Thank you. That is actually very helpful in one sense, because it spells out some of the timescales. Would you accept that the timescale for the bill, particularly when at stage one we have to decide on the principles of the bill, is made rather difficult by the fact that the timescales for the consultation on the new Code of Governance are not very well balanced?
I can understand the difficulties. I think Alan's explained the timeline that we've been working to for quite some time, and I think the bill to us, the timing of the bill was slightly unexpected.
Mr Simpson, could I ask you about, you said very strongly, and so have the university principals, that there are parts of the bill that you fundamentally object to because you feel that it is pushing government responsibility a bit too far, and that's at a time, as we mentioned earlier this morning, when the countries around the world that are having the greatest success in HE in terms of not only the academic ability of their students, but the positive destinations and the lower dropout rates, etc., are those countries where government has actually taken a reduced role within HE. Do you feel that that is such a significant part of this bill? Is that one of the reasons why you are deeply concerned about the need to legislate?
Yes, we are deeply concerned at the actual wording in the bill. I mean, the policies, as stated, we don't really object to. We recognise accountability, we recognise all of that, and the Cabinet Secretary has made it clear that he supports autonomy. But our reading of the bill itself, we don't read that into it, and we see a future minister being able to impose things which may not relate to the code, as has already been said, because there's no actual reference to a particular code and there are various other areas where the word impose is used.
Mr Munro, when the principal came to Timothy O'Shea, he was very strong in his views regarding the fact that the responsible autonomy that Edinburgh University had developed in terms of their research potential and bringing in a huge amount of money as a result of that, and the knowledge exchange economy had been hugely successful because he felt that there hadn't been government control over that. I take it that is a view that is not only shared by yourself, but is that common to those on the university court and the consultations that you have carried out with students and staff?
Undoubtedly. I mean, the great advantage that Edinburgh University has is that, and it's true of other universities in Scotland, is that we have an international footprint. And that's important for Scotland because it brings expertise into Scotland and exports expertise out from Scotland as well. So for the economic development of Scotland, having a vibrant higher education sector is of fundamental importance. You know, in Edinburgh here, not very far from here, we've got the supercomputers that actually serve not only Scotland, the UK, but also significant parts of Europe as well. We've got to maintain the flexibility to respond to these opportunities as they come out, which is why the autonomy that's given to the universities themselves and indeed their courts to respond very quickly often to some of the opportunities that come out does seem to me to be an important part of maintaining the economic vibrance of Scotland.
Very much.
Thank you. Neil Finlay.
Yeah, I'm looking at your submission. I'm going to read you a list here and see if we can identify anything here. The Committee of Scottish Chairs, Sir Moyer Lockhead, Mr Frizzell, Mr Sanderson, Professor Mr Munro, Dr Mr Forbes, Mr Bloomer, Mr Slater, Lord Valence, Lord Lindsay, Mr Ross, Mr Bryan, Mr Rodney, Professor Mr McIver, Professor Mr Brown, Mr Simpson, Mr Hunter and Mr Blackburn. Does not appear to be the most diverse group that we have here. And what Mr Simpson says is that you decided amongst yourselves that you were going to run the steering group. Now, that's hardly surprising. It just appears like a kind of old boys network who appoint themselves to come up with this new governance arrangement for universities. Now, can you see why people would be cynical about that?
You say run the steering group. We're not running the steering group. What we did was set up a steering group, which is independent from us. We have 3 chairs on it, yes, but we have Lord Kelvin, Lord Smith of Kelvin, very experienced director. We've got Dame Elisha Angelini on it, and we've got Simon Pepper on it, who, as an ex-rector, he's actually wrote the book on the guidance for rectors. So, you know, he has operated as a rector in the past and therefore understands the student perspective. So they are the people who are actually running the steering group. The chairs have merely set it up. When the code is prepared, we don't anticipate having any comment on it because we've got experts to do it. We will be accepting it and offering it out for consultation.
Previously said in your introduction that you wanted it to be operating in a more collegiate manner, and yet we don't have any staff, we don't have any students represented on it. I mean, how is that a more collegiate way of operating?
The real purpose, we believe, is actually to consult fully in every institution, and that's what we've been doing, with one exception, which was the Conservatoire, as I said, because dates didn't work, but they've had an opportunity to input nevertheless. So there's been a vast amount of discussion at each of the institutions. I know for my own one, when the consultant came, he met the lay members of court, he met the members of staff separately, he met the students separately, and when they met the members of staff, there were representatives from all 3 unions who are recognised within the institution. So you've got that happening in every institution. So we're getting the input from people, and that's how we get the collegiate work.
Did you consider having staff or trade union representation and student representation on the group? And if you didn't, why? If you did and rejected that, why?
We did consider it, and the difficulty was finding one or two representatives that would actually cover the complete range, because we've got the NUS, which is not represented in all institutions, and we've got 4 main unions who represent probably about 30% of our students, of the staff around the institutions. So to get a representative one would have been difficult. So that's why we've really gone for the consultation.
Just so I get this right, you found it easy enough to get representative of the chairs of universities, but you could not find someone who would have represented staff or students. That's the consideration you made and why you rejected those people from sitting on the steering group.
Nobody on the steering group is a representative. They are there as individuals, and Lord Smith is there not as a representative of anything, but as a chair, an independent chair, in the same way as Dame Elish Angelini and Simon Pepper are.
If I can just come in there, and can I just take it from a different angle, perhaps? Because the steering group is not there to impose its views on what the code looks like at the end. It's not there to impose. It's there to make the thing happen. What is important is that we develop a code which is evidence-based. And that evidence is being gathered at the present moment by consulting with a wide range of people, stakeholders, who are concerned with the whole of the higher education sector, including staff and including students. It's my view, if staff, and the best view in which we can actually embrace the views of staff and students are not having them on the steering group where they can't express their own personal opinion, really. It is through the consultative process that they can bring the evidence there that's actually going to inform what's actually in the steering group. And I think that's an important distinction between the role of the steering group as the group that guides it and makes sure that the processes happen, from those that are presenting the evidence that's actually going to inform what's actually within the code.
So just so that I'm clear on this, chairs sit on the steering group, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
So it's okay for them to comment.
It's okay for them to guide the process.
So why is it not okay for staff and students to guide the process?
What I was saying was that if we really want to embrace the opinions and the evidence of staff and students, then that's best done through the consultative process.
Why does that principle not apply the same to chairs?
It could be, yes. I accept that.
Now we're getting somewhere.
Yes,
Could I just put a bit of flesh on the bones of that? The external expert, the steering group, is engaged to go out and see all the institutions and indeed see the viewership, trade unions and other interested parties that we heard earlier this morning. In their university consultations, they've seen over 120 members of staff and over 70 students to get differing views from all the different spectrums that there are from all sectors. So hopefully that gives you some comfort. There's been some very broad consultation.
Final point. In hindsight, do you think it was wrong or it looks bad that you do not have, that your people at your level are represented, but the people who actually deliver the education or are being educated are not included in the steering group? Do you think that looks bad? Would you concede that?
I don't believe that it does, because the essence is the consultation. That's the purpose of the steering group, is going out to consult and obtain the evidence.
Okay, thank you. Joe McAlpine.
On that point, you've been talking up the consultation, but Ms Senior, representing the staff at universities this morning, didn't seem to be terribly impressed with the consultation at all. I don't know if you heard her evidence, but she said that some of their members had given very little time at these sessions to put their views, and that there weren't any minutes taken, so there was really no confidence from the trade unions that their staff views were being taken on board in the consultation process.
I comment on that simply from the steering group. We certainly haven't had any feedback directly to us from anybody as to gaps, if you like, lapses in that consultation process. What I heard this morning was interesting. I will go back and speak to the external experts to try and gauge what their views are. Certainly in my own institution, the staff members I've managed to speak to who attended the sessions thought they were useful, they were full, and nobody's mentioned to me they didn't think they had enough time. But that's just one university I accept.
Can I just add to that? the fact that the consultative process also has a website attached to it as well, so there's total transparency. But also it allows anyone who wishes to contribute to the debate to do so. So there's a total openness there, and I think that's important because, you know, within a university, you know, you've got a whole lot of diverse opinions as well, you know, and to be able to tap into that diversity, I think, is really important. And the website is another mechanism by which we can tap into the opinions of both staff and students as well.
I would have thought that you would have put more weight on the view of the trade union representative of your staff. You know, you seem to be saying, well, anyone can contribute through the website, but you've got the trade union representative coming and saying, well, our staff are not happy with this consultation process, and you seem to be sweeping it away and saying, we've got a website, it's okay.
Far from it, but we're extending it beyond just the voice of the elected trade union representatives. You know, it's additional.
Are you saying that the voice of the elected trade union representative is somehow not representative?
No, not at all, not at all. And that's why we're listening to it and taking it into account. Far from it.
I think it's important for the committee to understand that while many of our staff are members of trade unions, many are not. In my own university, it's around 50-50. So we have to find a way, and the consultation process has done that, to try and tap into the understanding, knowledge, experience and submissions from all ends of the spectrum.
Can I take you back to the evidence that has just been referred to by Joan McAlpine from Mary Senior earlier this morning, where she referred to the consultants coming along and spending half an hour with a mixed group of people representing different, you know, students, staff, some of them maybe from who are members of trade unions, some of them not, a variety of different people with a variety of different views, all together in the space of half an hour. Is that your understanding of how it should work?
I misled you. It's not quite how it worked. It's certainly in my institution, as far as I know, and all the other institutions. There were 4 separate meetings held at each institution by the Royal Conservator for the reasons explained. One was with staff, which included trade union representatives but also other members of staff. One with students, one with lay governors, and one with the principal and the executive team. So there were 4 separate meetings at each university. In my own case, at my own university, they are lasted 3/4 of an hour. Certainly the one I was in lasted about an hour. So they were quite extended. So if you've picked up that there was just 1 half-hour meeting to cover all these many audiences, no, that's not it.
Well, I didn't pick it up. That's what Mary Senior said this morning.
No, I think she was talking. I took her to say about the meeting that was held in the university. She was talking about purely with the staff representatives, not all these other audiences. That was the way I took it. She was saying. I mean, I don't know.
Well, I think we'll seek clarification on that, because it's certainly not the way I understood it. Do any members have any other questions they want before I press on? Sorry, Joe McAlpine.
If I could ask a different topic. Do you think it's right that a principal of a university should be paid more than the Prime Minister of the UK?
I think I'm in no position to judge on what the Prime Minister should be paid. I think perhaps I am in a position to judge the sort of salaries that a principal of a university with a turnover of something in excess of £700 million a year should actually be paid. And the way in which I do that is really by benchmarking internationally, and because that's the only guidance I've got. I've got to see what it is that is an appropriate level of salary for those elsewhere and judge that accordingly. I may say that over the last 4 years, I think, there's been no increase in the salary of the principal of Edinburgh University. And I think that's responding to an attitude that's around at the present time. It creates concerns for me because somewhere down the line I'm going to have to, or my successor is going to have to appoint a new principal of Edinburgh University. And I'm not sure if I'd be able to get a top-class principal of a university on the salary that we pay the Prime Minister.
I'd like to comment on that.
I'd have nothing to add to that.
In 2010, which is the last figures I have, the principal of Heriot-Watt University was paid a bonus of £39,000, bringing his salary from 160,000 to 106 to 199,000. That does seem a little excessive in the current financial climate.
I don't know the details of Heriot-Watt, so I can't comment on that.
The ratios in terms of the pay of the lowest member of staff at the university to the highest member? Have you done any work on that? Or, I would not hold you to it just now, maybe the three gentlemen could provide the committee with that information.
Yep.
We
could provide that.
Okay, thank you. There was another issue which was raised this morning, and it was raised primarily, I believe, because of the comments from yourselves, not necessarily individually, but collectively, on the issue of another part of the bill, which was the fees cap issue. If you were here earlier, you will have heard some of the exchanges on that matter. Could you explain your thinking with regard, and maybe you could clarify, because there was some debate between ourselves and Alistair Sim, but what exactly is your view on the issue of the fees cap?
We made it quite clear in our submission that we thought that 4 clauses of the bill were unnecessary and 3 were potentially detrimental. The one that's just unnecessary is the one relating to fee caps. And we don't see it as a particular issue. It's just unnecessary because the policy that it seems to be trying to address is the fact that we might be making it less attractive for rest of UK students to come to Scotland by increasing the fees to a level that would discourage them. That's my reading of the policy statement. And all students are trying to encourage students. All universities are trying to encourage students from the rest of the UK. It provides a diverse range of students, and we're certainly not wanting to prejudice the people coming north from down south.
I'm sure you're not, but given that this is a competitive environment and students are competing against each other for these places, if you have 100 places for students from the rest of the UK and you have 200 applications, all willing to pay £9,000 without a cap, isn't there at least a suspicion that you might say, well, we'll make it £10,000 or £12,000, because we might still get 150 applications or 120 applications. And effectively, if we put it to £15,000, we might get 100 applications. And effectively, we'll manage to fill our 100 places, but we'll get £15,000 rather than £9,000. What's to stop you doing that?
I was going to just say, the chairs, as much as the principals through University of Scotland support the principle at LE of restraining the amount paid to our UK students. And indeed, that's why the voluntary code, which Alistair Sim was referring to earlier, was put in place last year, and as you heard this morning, has been renewed again for this year. This is the other reason why we think that legislation is unnecessary. The sector is already addressing this issue, admittedly through voluntary means, but with great willingness. And the chairs, the principals, University of Scotland, we're all at one on this one.
I want to address the other side of the coin, because fees are one side of the coin. Bursaries are the other side of the coin. And I think there's an incumbence on all the Scottish universities to try to raise money from whatever sources, to actually produce new bursaries for young people, or indeed older people, who wish to come to university and can have the opportunity to come to university and will not be disadvantaged by the fact that they're economically challenged or whatever. Certainly in Edinburgh, we've used a very robust system of actually assessing that, not based on the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation, but on looking at the whole of the income that's within the family as well. And I think that's a very sustainable way of actually doing it. And in fact, Edinburgh University has invested a significant amount of money in terms of providing bursaries to ensure that we have that diversity coming into the university, which is what I think we are all trying to achieve. And in many, these are bursaries that don't just cover, the money is given, so the student has the opportunity to spend that money in whatever way they like. It may be in paying the fees, it may be in paying accommodation or whatever. In addition, for Scottish students, there are accommodation bursaries. And to some extent, this is to help the flow from the west to the east, which does seem to be a fairly significant barrier, I'm afraid. But in order to get them across into Edinburgh University and to take advantage of whatever Edinburgh University has to offer.
I'm just trying to clarify. I mean, if the voluntary code is set, as it has been, to be at the same level as fee maximum for the rest of the UK, what is the problem with legislating to have that set within the bill at that level?
We haven't particularly said there is a problem. All we've said is that it's unnecessary.
Well, well, maybe you could confirm. Maybe the BBC, of course, were inaccurate in the reporting this morning. But what seemed to be on the news this morning was that the chairs wished universities to be free to set the maximum level as they saw fit.
Not the maximum level. We wish to be able to set a level which is appropriate. And that means, because we are actually trying to encourage as many students into our Scottish universities as possible. So, you know, there's a market there that's going to define that. And it wouldn't necessarily be on the way up.
I'm glad you said that. So what you're trying to do is you want to be free to set fees at a level that is appropriate below the £9,000 fee at the moment. That's what you're saying.
That's who we're at the moment, yes.
In what possible way does the bill interfere with that right?
I don't think it does.
We haven't said that it does interfere with that.
I'm just trying to clarify exactly.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know where the BBC got the information from, but if you read our submission, all it says is that we believe this provision, this section of the bill, to be unnecessary, and that's all.
Okay, I'm sure that the BBC are as accurate as ever. Are any other members wish to ask any further questions this morning? Okay. Can I thank you, gentlemen, for coming along this morning? I very much appreciate it, and could I have a short suspension? Can I welcome to the committee our final witness this morning, Ian Mackay, who is the Chair of Edinburgh College Board and the Edinburgh Regional Lead. Ian, can I invite you to make a brief opening statement, please?
I shall keep it brief, Chairman. Thank you very much for the invitation. We certainly, I think on behalf of all the regional leads and the chairs in the colleges, would welcome the opportunity to contribute to what's been, I think, a long and difficult task for yourselves and yet to continue. The regional leads are very much the new kids on the block, and you'll see that we're only a few months old, and perhaps evidenced by the noticeable lack of paperwork from us that you have. I think our experience, however, may be helpful to the committee in its considerations, particularly as regards merger and the efficiencies which follow from merger, since that is such a fundamental part of the process which is outlined, the regionalisation process which is outlined in the bill, and will be a major factor should that bill come to pass. I think more importantly also, regional chairs will be a central part of the new apparatus and the most important part of governance. You've heard quite a lot about governance this morning, but I think governance and corporate governance within the new structures, certainly to my mind, will be a critical part. There's been criticism in the past, and repeated again this morning here at committee, of the history of good governance within the sector. It's a view that I personally would share, and I think that the changes which are envisaged in the bill certainly offer the opportunity for us to begin to address that and to get it right, if it's ever possible in any corporate body to get it right, but certainly to try and aim in that direction. The other side of the coin is, of course, money and finance, and the opportunities for savings of the public purse that particularly the merger process, as I said, offer. That aspect of regionalisation is, again, I think, an important place where regional leads just now and regional chairs following the bill will play a very critical part. And indeed, it is the scale and the timing of that process, which you'll have seen from the submissions, certainly from Edinburgh College, that we have some concerns as to how that is carried out, while being, in an overall sense, very supportive of the changes themselves. The last thing I would say to you is that it would be my view that the changes which are being considered here also offer the opportunity for an authoritative voice in the sector. I think an authoritative advocacy and an authoritative voice to lead and to speak for the sector has been missing for some time. And my hope would be that as we move towards the regional chairs, that will also offer, with all the other things which are being talked about just now, the need for a central voice for management, changes in bargaining perhaps, and so on, that we would actually be able to see a sector which is able to unite around, as I say, an authoritative voice and an authoritative leadership that can offer them some way forward. It's quite a tall order we're giving ourselves for the new kids in the block, but I think it is always nice to have ambitions of those kinds. But I'll stop there, Chair, since it's probably best that we carry forward with questioning.
Thank you very much. Ian, can I begin the questioning with this, a practical question? Can I ask you to take us through what exactly it is you do? What regional leads do? I mean, effectively, as you say, you're new kids on the block, you've just been appointed, but what is, on a day-to-day practical basis, the purpose of regional leads? That's
a very good question. At our last regional leads meeting, I was actually charged with trying to audit exactly where all the regional leads are so that we could answer that question for ourselves. My understanding of it would be that regional leads are there really to help move along that process of merger and the establishment of a more regional programme and a regional perspective for strategy within that particular region and so on. What you will find, of course, is that if you look at the different 13 areas, they're at quite different stages of that process. I myself, I suppose, was fortunate that I came into a process which had already largely begun with the Edinburgh colleges, who were themselves following a parallel course towards merger. So that the idea that they should form one college wasn't anything new to them. And the only difference, I suppose, was that I was joining in that process as a regional lead. That's been the case elsewhere. But if you look, as I say, across Scotland, you'll see different stages of development where the regional lead is becoming engaged with the local colleges, talking about merger or perhaps facilitating what is already an agreement to merge so that they can begin to move towards either one regional college which is the most common shape, or in places like Lanarkshire, where the regional lead is actively engaged in negotiating the terms of that coming together. So at the moment, it's a very good question. We're seeking a full answer to that as to just how much we will be engaged. But I think we are part of that transition, moving through with the bill into what will be, I think, the critical role of the regional chair once the bill has become law.
Thank you. Liz Smith.
Thank you, Mr Mackay. Obviously, we've had quite a bit of evidence that's been submitted on the college sector that suggests that they feel very strongly that one of their greatest successes has been the ability to deliver on a local basis. And we've also had some concerns expressed that perhaps that might be diminished in the bill, some witnesses. Given what you're saying about New Kids on the Block, could you give us an assurance that that local dimension will be very much part of the process by which the people like yourselves will deliver college education?
I think it would be very foolish indeed if at the end of this process we lost that. I think one also has to ask the degree to which we've actually managed to achieve it under the current system. To my mind, the role of regional chairs, and I think it's easier to speak about regional chairs since you're talking about post-bill, the role of regional chairs there will be quite critical in ensuring that the regional bodies are able to balance between achieving a strategic view for the region overall and making those engagements with the key stakeholders and so on, while retaining the flexibility of local organisation and local bodies. I mean, I was listening intently to some of your other witnesses this morning, and I think you can see in different aspects of the relationship of public bodies and public organisations to education, particularly to post-school education, just how easy it is to get gaps and for people to fall through the system. To my mind, that is the best way of getting around that is what local organisation offers you. That's very different, however, from a system which, to my mind, atomised further education within Scotland. I mean, I put my cards on the table. At the time of incorporation, I was the senior official within EIS who was dealing with the further education section. I was a very big critic of the proposals that came forward at that time for incorporation. To my mind, they would have the effect, and I think I'm on record possibly even in this body, I'm on record as saying that it would have an atomising effect because, in fact, you wouldn't get the catering for the whole community that I thought the regions as were had offered. Unfortunately, in too many cases, that came to pass. Therefore, us pulling them back into regions and giving us that better opportunity for scale and for strategic advance, I think gives what has tended to be the Cinderella of further education a better chance at the races.
Thank you. That's an interesting answer. You said in your opening remarks that you felt it was very important that the college sector had a voice that would speak on a unified basis. Yet we heard this morning from your former colleagues in the EIS particularly saying that some concerns they have is that the FE sector is actually going to have different tiers. We heard about the concerns over two types of colleges, and we also had a fairly substantial discussion about UHI, which is obviously yet another different animal. Do you have a concern that some aspects of the bill as it stands just now is actually creating some divisions within FE?
I think in a place as diverse as Scotland is, it will be necessary to have a degree of variance in the way in which you exercise control over a national structure. It makes sense that there should be variance. What doesn't make sense is when, through that variance, there is inequality or a different purpose emerging. To my mind, it is right and proper that the bill should be trying to recognise that variance and to recognise those local conditions. I would be a hypocrite if I said on the one hand that local is good and then took no account of local. If there is local variance, then we should take account of that. What is incredibly important to my mind is that there is good corporate governance, whatever the individual shape or mechanism that one uses in order to affect that. I don't think the shape and the mechanism itself is the problem. It's the policies and the attitudes and so on that one brings to that, and the establishment of good corporate governance and good relationships between the executive and the board. That's the critical area for me.
Would you accept that, given what the EIS provided this morning, also actually Colleges Scotland said much the same thing, that because you have different types of structure which reflect that local delivery, you therefore have different lines of accountability? Is that a concern to you, speaking on behalf of the college sector, as to how that accountability will relate to the Scottish Funding Council and to Scottish Government ministers?
It would have to be a personal view just now, because it's not something I think the regional leads would have a collective view on. But my personal view would be that I don't see the one necessarily following the other. I think it's perfectly possible to have, as I said, a variety of different mechanisms, but to ensure that you have proper public accountability and transparency in the way in which that mechanism operates. To my mind, as I say, what is critical here is good governance and a good relationship between the board and the executive. When those get out of kilter, it doesn't actually matter how long the line of command is or how small or big the institution is. You've just got it wrong at that point. You've just actually got your relationship between the board and the accountabilities and so on that any executive should have get lost. And I would say to you, that is not something which is unique to the public sector. We've seen many instances of it, either in different parts of the public sector or indeed in the private sector, when you get that wrong. I think in many ways one of the most important offers that we have through this bill is for us to try and get that right and to try and get that relationship working.
Thank you.
Neil Finlay.
Yeah, you mentioned the consideration about local access and local provision. My understanding is that at the Edinburgh College at the moment, the joinery and construction campus in Mr Beattie's constituency at Dalkeith is indeed going to be moved to Granton, wholesale to Granton, therefore, which is quite a considerable distance away. Therefore, doesn't that kind of reflect the concerns that many of us had about local access being lost? And how are, say, young people from East Lothian or certain areas of Mid Lothian going to continue to access courses when the course is now going to be provided at Granton?
Just given that you've mentioned Mr Beattie's constituency, do you want to come in at this point, Colin, or not?
Yes, I mean, we're still seeking a great deal more information, obviously, on this proposed move. It was just recently come to light, and I have in fact myself written to Edinburgh College asking for more information on that, and also to the local council, who are very much involved in that decision. I don't know if at this time whether a great deal more information is available.
Perhaps Mackay can answer both these points.
Just add a wee bit to that? I think that's very helpful what Mr Beattie said, because I think as far as I'm aware, the staff and the students and the businesses who send apprentices to that college are just as much in the dark about what's happening. So I think that's helpful.
It's a useful example. Your final point's wrong. They're not in the dark. They have been spoken to as well. In fact, because when Mr Beattie and others had raised this, it came in the press, you'll recall, a couple of weeks ago. I myself was discussing it with the principal and asking whether, in fact, there had been conversations, and I'm aware that there have. But there's a much more important point behind there in your question, rather than just the doings of Edinburgh College. It's how, in fact, you continue to reflect local demand, and particular relationships with employers and with other agencies in a locality, when taking advantage of the strategic advantages and so on of regionalisation. Now, when I first started in FE, that's what happened, because all of the FE colleges in Lothian were part of Lothian Region and were actually ran by Lothian Region. So you had at one and the same time the democratically accountable body of the regional authority, which had control over the colleges, and you then had the different sites, in fact, they were called much the same thing, Esk Valley College, Stevenson College, Telford College, Napier College, in fact, when I first started, through which that general policy of the regional authority was then carried out into the different neighbourhoods of Edinburgh and the Lothians. I don't think we're in that much different an area. We've brought together those local colleges, which previously were either competing with each other in terms of what the provision was, and therefore the locality would have to have taken its chance as to what came out of that competition. We've taken those, put them together, and I hope are now in a position to take that more strategic overview, similar to the old Lothian region did, as to how that provision is then made available to people across the whole of that area. Now, I don't think it's right for you to duplicate and over-provide in certain specialist areas. I think particularly as you get towards highly technical areas, it's very important that you're able to offer the best possible facilities which are there. Certain things, yes, you would have a geographic spread. Others, you will put them in a place which allows you to build up a centre of excellence and a centre of expertise. We're still at the point of the new Edinburgh College, and I'd remind you, we vested on October the 1st. We're still at the point of actually having that engagement with the community as to how, in the end, we will rejig the curriculum and things that we do. But I think that's part of the process that this offers us. It offers us the ability to take the quantum of the facilities which are available in the colleges that were there and were competing with each other, and bring that quantum together so that as far as the communities overall are concerned, they can get the provision that they need close by to their point of delivery. But more importantly, within the region as a whole, we have the opportunity to provide centres of excellence and good training, both for the employers in the area and for the community in the area. So, as I say, coming from where I have come, it's a very similar process to what did happen previously through the old local authority system.
The area that I have experience of is the construction sector, and a lot of the courses that would be provided locally would be access courses, it would be school provision, it would be low-level, not high-tech, localised provision to give young people an access into the construction industry. That appears to me to be quite a significant amount of the work that was being provided at this campus. If we move that to Granton, if your organisation moves that to Granton, then do you accept that for those people who are accessing at a lower level, that they will not travel to Granton, and that there is likelihood that they will not get that provision locally? That you just won't travel because the actual funding council agree with that concept, that the higher you go up, as Griggs did, the higher you go up the academic level, people are more willing to travel. So is that confirmed? Would you confirm that?
Sorry, just before Mr Mackay answers this. You're quite right to use an example, and the local example you've used, that's perfectly acceptable. But what we're interested in here, I think, is the principle in terms of the bill and whether or not that's the likely outcome in other areas as well as your own area. So if Mr Mackay can answer on the principle.
It's okay, Chair.
Forgive me, Chair, but
I'll take this one.
I think it's for me to ask the questions. It's for yourself to ask the questions.
I'm quite happy to answer,
So,
Chair.
Mr Mackay, let me just clarify this. This is a session asking questions about the Post-16 Education Bill. It is not a session on what's happening in your particular region. You're using that as an example, and I'm quite happy for you to, as I said, to use that. But what I want to do is stick to the bill and the impact that any example might have in the generality and the principle of the bill. That's what we're doing.
Chair, perhaps that could be helpful.
Excuse me, Mr Mackay, with respect, that may be what you want to stick to. I'm using a practical example about the issues that are coming out of the bill that are real for people at the moment, and I think that is highly relevant to what we're talking about in this bill.
And I've said I have no problem with the practical example, but the example is an example. What we're talking about is how that practical example implicates other areas in terms of the principle of the bill. Mr Mackay.
Chair, perhaps I can be helpful in my answer, because I think, in fact, the two are irretrievably connected. Every college that's being established, if it involves a merger of several colleges, several sites, every college will have to go through exactly this process of having to think through the opportunities that the merger offers versus the potential difficulties that that merger offers. That's the same in any merger, in any area of work. Can I use that specific example to illustrate the point in the bill? Leaving aside that, in fact, the thinking is still not clear on that particular example, as it happens, one of the last things I ever did as a trade union official within FE, was to negotiate the transfer of the building arrangements that Mr Finlay takes an interest in, the building arrangements from Stevenson College in the east of the city to the Granton Telford College in the north of the city. And we transferred wholesale all of the building departments, and I don't regard them as low level, but entry level certainly, areas there. We did that must have been somewhere around about 1987, and we did that, as I say, because it was recognised between the two colleges that were then under Lothian region control that it allowed us then to have a much better facility to better serve the trade, and in that way to better serve people coming into the trade through maximising the potential of Telford College, as it was then, to actually offer that. I think it's important that we recognise, while yes, there are stats about the falling away as you go towards lower-level courses or entry-level courses and so on, within those professions themselves, there's immense change. I don't think anyone would accept anymore that there are just hammer and screwdriver professions there anymore. They're increasingly highly technical. They're increasingly involving other areas of education alongside the work itself. I would hope that, in fact, at the end of the day, here in Edinburgh, or indeed in any other part of the country which, as the bill goes through, will be having to address this same process, that what we will get are good educational reasons and good reasons for serving a community and the workforces within that community, which direct why certain things are made available in certain places. As it stands at the moment, my fear would be that you get an unreasonable competition coming into that, a sort of bums on seats fight that actually gets in the way of us doing that process right. So I would see, as I say, the regionalisation and the strategic view that that offers us as an advantage in those situations, not as a disadvantage.
Ian MacArthur.
Probably draws together a bit of what Neil and Liz were asking. You talked earlier on about the importance of having a single voice, an authoritative voice you were talking about. But you then went on to acknowledge the importance of recognising local variance. I mean, would you accept that there's a concern that that determination to have a single authoritative voice is at risk of overriding the perhaps inconvenient and inconsistent voice that may emerge from individual local campuses and local colleges?
I don't see a local voice as inconvenient. I see it as a very necessary...
In terms of providing a consistent view across the...
No, let me explain. Let me explain what I mean by that. I don't see, as I say, locality as a bad thing. I see it as a good thing. I think where you have difficulties within a sector like further education is when you get an unacceptable variance, say in the terms and conditions of some of your workforce, and the pay and so on that's being paid at different parts of the country, or if you've got some variance in funding mechanisms and so on that basically led to inequalities across the country. I think it's also difficult if you have a situation pertaining which doesn't allow you to basically have someone to stick up for the sector and to make arguments on behalf of the sector, or indeed for the sector to come to a collective view. At the moment, even organisations, you had one this morning, even organisations like Scotland's colleges and so on, they're voluntary membership organisations. They're not a collective voice. They don't have the ability, say, for example, were we to have a return to national bargaining, which has been speculated about and has been in the press. Were we to have a return to national bargaining at the moment, I see no mechanism out there which would actually form the management side. It doesn't exist. There is no body which actually has that authority or legal status within the sector to be able to do that. And that's what I mean by us moving to a more effective collective national voice.
In terms of access, I mean, the points I think Neil Finlay was referring to, the issues of access, course content as well. I mean, it's not inconceivable that there will be differences of opinion across the region about where that provision is. I think you talked about the problems of duplication and over-provision. Now, frankly, however difficult it is for students who find themselves in the situation of having a course relocated from Dalkeith to somewhere the north of Edinburgh, it is perhaps a lot more manageable than having a course relocated out with Orkney to somewhere closer to Inverness, for example. And therefore, I would ask you to consider, is there a legitimate concern that in pursuit of having that strategic unity of view, that perhaps not immediately, where people are still fairly confident in their current positions, that over time there's a kind of homogenisation within that region that gravitates towards a kind of central view and downplays the voice of those in local campuses, which at the moment are perhaps stronger as a result of where we are currently, whatever the problems with that current system may be.
I think I'd refer you back to the points that I made to Ms Smith earlier. How you use that greater power for strategic work and that's given through regionalisation is very much down to the policies and attitudes that you bring to that. But it does give you that greater power. I agree with you. How you use it is up to the bodies themselves, and I would trust that they were being held to account. And I don't think. Well, let me finish. I don't think that simple move in itself, therefore, takes away those local advantages. But I think what you're perhaps neglecting is that some of those apparent local advantages also bring with them problems of atomisation and of unnecessary competition between different individual units and so on, and a lack of cohesiveness for a sector which was always suffering from being, the sort of poor relation within education.
To point, though, in the bill to the safeguards that would give people who have those concerns a degree of confidence that, were those situations to arrive, that there is some recourse within what is being proposed by way of legislation. Indeed, particularly given the concern, the wider concerns in terms of the extent of ministerial influence in the college sector going forward.
That's a wide question, since you're moving over 2 or 3 different areas there, but let me try and answer it. The first point is, I see no less accountability in this bill for the regional committees that would be established through it than there is within the 92 bill of the college boards which currently run our system. So I see no detriment there, and in fact I see the advantages that a larger strategic view give you. The accountability, the corporate governance involved in one to t'other, I don't see any enormous difference between the two. In terms
of ministerial appointments of
which is exactly the point I was just coming to. In terms of what I mean is in terms of the structures, the structure is the structure. You have a board which is established either to run a college, or you have a board which is established to run, well, either a number of colleges or a college with a number of sites. The accountability of those boards must indeed be as transparent and as good as we can possibly make it. The third point that you were asking was where the minister comes in. And there I think you're right to draw attention to it. It's been controversial. I personally have no problem with the idea that we have a chair of those regional boards, which will be important bodies, being appointed through our public appointment structure in much the same way as the chair of an NHS, local board or whatever would be appointed in that way. Their accountability then to the minister for doing their job, I think again, as we've seen unfortunately in other areas of the public sector quite recently, it is normally the first port of call of both the media and the public when some problem arises in the public body for the minister to intervene and to do something about it. As I understand the powers which are available within the bill, that's there, for the minister so to do. I think it would be very bad governance all round, where a minister seeing their job as, doing the job of the regional authority and interfering overly in the job of those people who are actually there to do the job of work. But that would, I'm afraid, be I think that would bring into question a behaviour on the part of a minister which went way beyond the legislation and would be much more a style of work that would be unacceptable. But, I mean, as I say, I'm trying to stick to the facts and to the corporate governance structures. They exist throughout the public sector. We've seen them exercised. Those of you who are as old as me will recall the Monklands affair and so on. They're from time to time required to be exercised and are, I think, legitimate ways in which the government looks after those of us who are appointed into public office actually being held to account to do our job.
I think that's helpful, although I think given recent events in terms of the Cabinet Secretary's interventions in respective roles over which he has no hiring and firing powers, I think there is an understandable concern, but I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Claire Adamson.
Mr Mackay, I was wondering if you wanted to address some of the concerns that have been raised about the myriad of arrangements that will mean that in some regional boards the voice of the students and staff will be heard, but in other, because of the arrangements, it won't be.
It would be my personal wish that every regional board had representation from staff and student body on it. And in fact, the proposed legislation clearly goes in that direction. I would hope that that was the case. I would hope that we therefore would benefit from that. I would hope too that a whole bunch of other areas of public life were represented on those boards. I think my own view is it's very important that we do have private sector involvement because those are by and large representing the companies and so on that people who are coming through those colleges are looking for employment in. We need to have a good balance between what companies are doing and what particularly further education is doing. I think it applies to HE as well, actually, but certainly what FE is doing. So I would like to see the boards having a wide representation there. I would, however, say that I don't think it's a numbers game. I've had discussion locally with my own student president on the benefit of having one voice for the students on the board or having two. Sometimes having two isn't actually as good as having one that you know is there and is speaking for you. What I think is actually more important is that there are proper arrangements made at an institutional level to ensure that the representatives of staff and students themselves have sufficient backup and resource to actually do the job properly. I don't think it's enough simply to tick the box and say we've got somebody sitting around about the committee. I would imagine you might find it very difficult to do the job that you do without the backup that you have from the clerks and your own staff and so on. Similarly, my view is that the staff, the more important one for me in terms of good governance is that when someone is sitting around that board table, they do so in a well-informed and well-resourced way and are able to actually do that job. And in a way, I think some of the discussion that we're having about numbers tends to deflect from what you do when you get there, which to my mind is by far the most important part of the equation.
Okay. Any members have any final questions? Okay, Mr Mackay, thank you very much for coming along this morning and giving us your evidence. Our final evidence-taking session of Stage 1 on the bill will be next Tuesday, when we'll hear from the Scottish Funding Council and from the Cabinet Secretary for Education and Lifelong Learning. Can I close the meeting?